We'll broadcast in a minute. Hello, morning, very good morning, and warm welcome to all of you to advantEDge, an initiative by the Economic Times and upGrad. Thank you all for joining us here today. My name is Alokesh Bhattacharya. I am senior editor of the Economic Times. I will take you through today's program, and it promises to be a very interesting and knowledgeable one. We have some really good speakers here today, and I'm delighted to welcome you here. At the outset, I would request Sudha Natarajan, the Director Response of BCCL, to give her introductory remarks. Sudha, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you to the Economic Times upGrad advantEDge Summit, Learn to Relearn. Education is something that's extremely precious to us from the Economic Times and the Times Group. And we're delighted to have a partner with us today, upGrad, which is equally passionate about education. You know, the breakthrough policy on primary education that has come about today after so many years of independence is going to bring about a long-term change in the way primary education is being seen in India. But as far as higher education is concerned, I think the deal has been that universities for centuries have really focused more on delivering life skills, and they're attuned more towards research. They've really not invested too much in the curriculum to ensure that the graduating students are skilled with job skills, are ready for industry to accept them. So there is a huge gap that industry is facing when they pick up graduates from institutes. So for that to happen, you know, I think to fill this gap, companies like upGrad have come up now, amongst others, and they're creating learning modules based on skill sets that industries need. Such a move is so direly needed, not just in India, worldwide also, and we're really happy to see it happening right now. This has opened up a $5 billion market for higher learning based on the skills that industries need. So the kind of topics that we are going to be addressing today are going to be three critical aspects of education through three panels. The first one is going to be how do we fix primary education? Second one will be making higher education more industry friendly. And the third one will be encouraging more entrepreneurs who can take Indian education to new heights through the use of technology. You know, before the British came into India, all of South Asia, the primary mode of education was the Gurukul system. And somewhere, I think we lost all the good aspects of the Gurukul system, which was learning by experience, where the Guru really taught you by experience. Germany as a country has invested over the years a lot in apprenticeship kind of programs. But I thank upGrad for coming up with the product which is going to fill the gaps that industry is facing today. Thank you. Over to you, Alokesh.
Thank you, Sudha. Thank you very much for that introductory note. You're right, you know, this new education policy is a watershed moment for India's education. And the next step, of course, would be to ensure that it gets implemented in letter and spirit. And before we, that is the subject, of course, of the first panel. But before we get there, I would like to invite Arjun Mohan, the CEO India of upGrad, to give his welcome address. Arjun, could you give your welcome address? Over to you.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Economic Times upGrad advantEDge, learn to relearn. We have been doing this property for some time now, but today is a special day because Economic Times have come and decided to partner with us. It's a testimony for the fact that what we stand for is really relevant in today's time. And and a thought leader like Economic Times have decided to back our series, which is about bringing in the thought leaders together and talking about education as a whole. So it is fantastic for me to start this, and once again, welcome. To go and give a little bit of background about all these things we are doing. I think Alkesh already mentioned a few things, but to add on to this, in the current world which we are living, the COVID times, what we keep saying, the ways which our lives have changed, all this have got online education to the forefront. At least in the last couple of months, literally everyone is talking about this tech domain in India as a sunrise sector, as the watershed moment or the penny drop moment for this sector. And it is very evident also. The traffics we have been getting exposed to, whether it be a K-12 company or a higher ed company, has been in all-time highs. 5x, 6x times number of people are coming in, trying it out. Slowly, we are moving into the mainstream arena from a very niche sector, which always used to be. If I specifically look at higher ed, in my opinion, higher ed online has been more exciting than any other sector in edtech today, because this is one place where 3x amount of activity is happening when compared to all other sectors in edtech. I mean, when every other sector is getting, sector within edtech is getting revolutionized due to COVID, we are getting revolutionized due to COVID. Last budget, the government of India came out with the concept of online degrees. And lastly, the new NEP. All these things are talking about revolutionary change in the sector we are in. And hence, edtech in higher ed has really come on to forefront. So according to the Redseer report, although the total addressable size of this market is much lesser than K-12, the size of this market is expected to grow to become the majority within edtech. So that's has been really exciting, and it is being seen in the journey upGrad has been taking also. upGrad, the largest in India in higher ed, has been growing at a breathtaking pace in the previous quarters of this financial year, and also earlier. I just want to take 1 minute to explain our philosophy, or the whole reason why upGrad started off and why is it today. So upGrad started off with the whole concept of improving the gross enrollment ratio in the colleges of India today. We, for any economy to go into the forefront, to be successful, the gross enrollment ratio should be in the range of 70 to 80%, while India has always languished at a 20%. So our founders felt that this is a very important thing to solve if we want to see our country in the forefront as a developed economy. And the solution to it, or the problem statement which they identified, was more about the infrastructure of education, not really the quality of education. We had great quality of education always. It has been more about the infrastructure issue in education, which we tried to solve by taking it online. Hence, the issue of scale is solved, and it's a testimony for our commitment to this, that when NEP 2020 came out, it spoke about the exact same thing, that the GER ratio in the colleges need to be solved. So we believe that we have been finally, whatever we stood for is going mainstream, and hence upGrad as a organization is also looking at becoming a more of a mainstream concept than a niche concept. So with that, I will close my short welcome speech and welcome you all to the sessions we are going to start. Sit back and hear the thought leaders talking about education. I am sure that by the end of the day, we are all going to relearn a few things, unlearn and relearn a few things, and turn wiser. Thank you so much, and welcome once again.
Thank you, Arjun. Thank you for that address. And, for us at ET also, this is a fantastic opportunity. And we are absolutely delighted to partner with upGrad for this, and wish you all the best in your effort to go mainstream from niche. I think that is sorely needed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alokesh. Thank you.
Thank you. So now it is time for the first panel to start, and for that, it is a very, very powerful panel where we're going to talk about the NEP and its impact and how we're going to implement. I will call upon first the moderator, my colleague Suchetna Ray, and she will come and introduce the panelists, and the first panel will come in. Suchetna, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alokeshda. Hello, everyone. I'm Suchetna Ray, Senior Assistant Editor with the Economic Times. And it gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you to the first panel discussion as well as to advantEDge. We have very exciting panels lined up. I'll begin with the first panel where we will discuss rewiring India's education system. We have a very strong panelist lineup, and let me start with introducing my panelists. First, Ramanathan Ramanan. He's the Mission Director, Atal Innovation Mission, and Additional Secretary, Niti Aayog. Sir, welcome and thank you for taking the time out. I have Professor Anil Sahasrabuddhe, Chairman AICTE. And I also have Professor Rajendra Srivastava, Dean and Novartis Professor of Marketing, Strategy and Innovation, Indian School of Business. We also have Professor Anju Seth, Director, IIM Calcutta. We have Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar. He's the Professor and Vice Chancellor, OP Jindal Global University. With him, we have Narayanan Ramaswamy, National Leader, Education and Skill Development, KPMG, and Phalgun Kompalli, co-founder of upGrad. Thanks to all of you for taking the time out and joining me. Thank you very much once again. And I hope that we'll have a very strong debate. We all know the problems with our education system, so let me not bore you with them once again. But now a document in the form of the National Education Policy 2020 promises to change it fundamentally. However, from promise to fulfillment is mostly a very long journey in India, as we all know. And among many other salient points, what gives people a lot of hope is that the NEP focuses on vocational learning. It promises a catch up with technology such as AI, etc. There is a thrust on online learning. There is also a promise of increasing the budgetary allocation to education to a significant percentage of the GDP. But like with any other document like the NEP, doubts are being raised about its effective implementation. So let's hear from our eminent panelists if this document can truly rewire the Indian education system. I'll begin this panel with a question which I will ask all of you. That is, and we'll begin with quick takes on the national education policy. What are your thoughts about it? Do you think that India has the money, that's the budget and the infrastructure to implement something like the NEP? Do we have the resources and as well as the teaching faculty to support it? I'll go to Mr. Ramanathan first.
Thank you, Suchetna, and good morning to everybody and the distinguished panel who are there. It's indeed a pleasure and privilege to be participating in this discussion, which should be a very important and a national discussion that has to be held in different quarters of the country. And the topic is learn to relearn. No other time has been as important as now for us to learn to relearn. And what is from learn to relearn? What do we have to relearn? First and foremost, we have had a rote learning mindset in our schools and our universities, in our colleges, where we have been encouraged to get good marks, get into a good school, get into a good university, get into a good job. And we have done remarkably well in that. We have a $191 billion IT/ITES industry that has sprung up because of our focus on education and rote learning. But what has brought us here is not going to get us to the next level. And therefore, it is very important for us to relearn how we are going to convert and transform the mindset that is prevalent from a rote learning mindset to a problem-solving, innovative mindset that our country needs. The second important thing that learn to relearn is how do you create an ecosystem of entrepreneurship and innovation in our country and convert not just from a nation of job seekers, but also of job creators. We have 1.3 billion people in our country. We have 1.4 million schools. We have 10,500 engineering and related institutions. We have 39,000 colleges, and we have 150 million young students entering into the workplace. If we are not able to address this very important demographic dividend, which is the envy of many a country, and be able to transform to a problem-solving, innovative mindset, to skills that are relevant to the modern age, skills like 3D printing, robotics, IoT, miniaturized electronics, augmented virtual reality that is sweeping the marketplace and it's changing the way solutions are being created. And if we do not create a nation of job creators versus just a nation of job seekers, we are going to do a big disservice to our demographic dividend. And that is why this particular learn to relearn and the new education policy, which is actually positioning us to meet on all these particular aspects, is so very important. And my take is that this is one of the most game-changing, revolutionary redrafting of our educational policy, which is going to help India not only grow up in its global innovation index, it has grown from 81 to 48 in just in the last 5 years. How do we go into the global top 10? And that will require this new education policy to really take root and be implemented in a very successful manner.
Thank you very much, sir. I'll take this question to Professor Sahasrabudhe. Mr. Ramanan spoke about the catch-up that Indian education needs to do with technology. The oft-repeated complaint, sir, is the outcomes gap. Students are not job ready. So how can we maintain the balance between, general education and skill development, which is based on market's need?
I think national education policy announced on 29th of July is certainly a transformative and game-changing policy. The reason is right from primary education, from class 6th, there is emphasis on building skills. It may be skills which are based on motor skills, maybe welding or carpentry on one side, or even programming skills to artificial intelligence skills being taught to the students right from age of around 10, 12 itself. They will be fully prepared when they come to the higher education. So that is what is going to happen in the immediate future. Coming to the higher education per se itself, AICT in the last 3 years has started many reforms which are seeing the fruits of that particular policy change which we started doing before the policy itself was announced. Starting from whether it is curriculum revision at regular intervals, faculty training programs under faculty development program called Atal Academies in AI, IoT, machine learning, 3D printing, robotics, cloud computing, cyber security, AR, VR, data science, and all these issues, including some of the topics of civil engineering or mechanical engineering, like, for example, whether it is environmental science or whether it is geotechnical engineering, all of those are being trained to the faculty members. And fortunately, you talked also about online education, and which upGrad and many other organizations have been doing. AICT, MHRD, then now Ministry of Education, have a portal called NEET, National Educational Alliance for Technology. And upGrad is also one of the agencies, which is one of the companies which is onboarded onto that. And these are all AI-based personalized learning tools which are available for students at a small cost. So apart from their regular curriculum, we have been providing opportunities for students to take up those type of courses, which are very short in duration, maybe 3 months, 6 months, but in the process, they will get empowered. And therefore, new education policy, while taking care of education, empowerment, entrepreneurship development, I think is going to be certainly a game-changing exercise that is going to happen. And as well, let us not be too much worried about what is the budget available. Certainly, government is providing large chunk of budget for doing this. But in terms of infrastructure, immediate actions are being initiated. For example, when we talk about online education, whether at a remote place in Nagaland or Arunachal Pradesh or in Jammu Kashmir, are the provisions of internet capabilities available? This question comes to mind because during COVID times, even in cities like Delhi and Mumbai, we see sometimes disruptions occurring. And that's why government is seized of the matter. There is a BharatNet initiative, which is taking to all the nooks and corners of the country, including very remote villages. I think that is where empowerment will begin.
Right. I'll take up from Professor Sahasrabudhe when he mentions faculty training. I'll take this question to both Anju ma'am as well as Professor Rajendra Srivastav, whoever wants to go at it first. My question is that however many institutes we open, even if they are premier institutes such as the IITs, IIMs, but the question remains, how can we create a system that generates teachers for these new institutes who are on par with those in your institutes? How do we create this faculty? Anju ma'am, do you want to go first? Ma'am, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this panel with the visionary implications of the NEP. I must say, I believe the plan to be incredibly well articulated. And I would like, before I talk about the need for for how we get to doctoral education, to spend a minute about what does the plan accomplish? What is the vision that it lays out? So, very broadly speaking, global knowledge superpower, what does that entail? It entails not just teaching, but also a depth of investment in research capabilities. When we think about our educational institutions, these are required to be a combination of learning to develop learning skills as well as research skills. And why is that necessary? Because the creation of new knowledge is at the foundation of helping people learn. The kinds of leaders that we want going into the future are those that have multidisciplinary talents, that have entrepreneurial talents, and most critically linked to the subject matter of this symposium, have the capability for lifelong learning. Because the world is going to change. Any set of knowledge and any set of skills that one acquires in the present time is likely to require a shift as one moves through one's career path. So what does that mean in the context of creating the kinds of teachers and the kinds of educators that facilitate these issues? These are required to be not just knowledgeable in their subject matters, but have the capability to encourage learning by doing. And they are mentors. They're not necessarily teachers in and of themselves, but they are mentors in encouraging ownership of learning on the part of the learner. And that is going to require doctoral education, PhD education of a particular variety, encouraging a linkage between research skills as well as teaching skills, learning by doing in the classroom. This is a tall order, but I must say that we have, India is perfectly capable of doing it. In the IIMs, we have created doctoral programs that develop some of our best teachers, and many of us are fully conversant with the model that this entails. So we should be able to do it. It will require enormous investment.
Absolutely. I'll take the question to Professor Rajendra Srivastav. Ms. Seth raised questions about the focus for accelerating innovation, accelerating research. And I think for that also we need to upgrade our faculty. So how do you think you can maintain this balance, Professor Srivastav?
There are plenty of steps. I think it all, excuse me, it starts with governance. The faculty incentives have to be aligned with innovation and creativity and writing. And that's what we're doing at ISP. And it's not very well known, but when it comes to per capita productivity of faculty, ISP is now number 20 in the world. When we look at the productivity, and this is in the leading journals, and we're talking about global journals, Journal of Finance, Operations Management, and so on. What is necessary is also for us to look at our doctoral programs.
Right.
When I was in Singapore, I started a PhD program in general management because many of the problems that are worth solving are not just marketing or finance or accounting or operations. So I started that, and that evolved into a DBA program, which is still running there. And the DBA program at SMU has now about 120 people into that program. We started the equivalent of the DBA program called EFPM, Executive Fellows Program, 3 years ago at ISP. The quality of people that we're getting, and India has a lot of talent, but this is senior managers. The average experience for the latest batch is 24 years. I've got several chief operating officers. I've got 3 CHROs. I've got a chief learning officer. I've got a chief marketing officer. These are the people in the executive fellows program. And I can tell you, we can take this group of people and we can put them up against anybody in the world. So India has a lot of talent, and we have a lot of senior managers who are looking for second careers. So we need to not only do the traditional American style PhDs, which we are prone to do, but we really need to look at generating people who can balance theory and practice. And that's what we're doing in part. And so I think there's a big opportunity out here in terms of creating our own people. The West is not going to ask us about Silicon Valley. They're going to ask us what to do about emerging markets. How do you manage growth? How do you manage resilience? And therefore, we have to look at the problems that are worth solving and the opportunities that are worth taking, in our own country first. So let me just stop there.
Absolutely. I'll go to Professor C. Rajkumar. Sir, I have two questions for you. First is the original question that I had for you. That is, the NEP is silent on private participation, really, largely. So that's one question. The second question springs from what Professor Srivastava just mentioned. How do you, the oft repeated complaint against Indian education is that a theory is alienated from its implementation. How do you ensure that the both come together? And how do you ensure that world-class research happens in India? When can India back perhaps a Nobel in the sciences again?
Well, thank you very much. I want to first of all thank both the Economic Times and upGrad for putting this together.
Yeah.
So Chitana, I think the reality is that let's first start with the fact that the National Education Policy 2020 is a revolutionary, radical, and indeed a truly transformative and progressive vision. There is no doubt about the fact that the people who drafted that had the thoughtfulness, had the farsightedness in reimagining Indian higher education. And almost every aspect of that policy talks about the future. It talks about regulatory reforms. It talks about digitization. It talks about internationalization. It talks about funding for research. It talks about faculty development. In fact, it has talked about everything that needs to be talked about with regard to the future. Now, the one of the things that I felt probably should have been covered, at least quite substantially, is the fact that the role of the private sector in relation to higher education. Very unfortunately, with over 70% of Indian higher education institutions in the private sector, and with over 70% of students today studying in private higher education institutions, with the state funding significantly reducing over the years, there is a tectonic shift that has happened in the Indian higher education at least a decade ago. And NEP ought to have had a stronger positioning and presence of it. I do believe that it is not so much that they didn't want to. I think there is enough room for that vision to be captured in the implementation process, because there are some very interesting observations made in the NEP, which actually talks about, removing the barriers and removing historical discrimination associated with the private sector. And private higher education institutions should be measured not on the basis of their origins, but their actual performance. So that room is there for us to overcome. And I do believe that the intention and the objective of the NEP will indeed solve that problem. As far as your second question is concerned, with regard to, you said how do we create a faculty? What was your second question?
My question was about how do you ensure that you maintain balance between theory and its practical application?
Got you. Very good. Well, this is one of the most difficult parts in India. Beautiful policies get formulated, but unfortunately, when it comes to implementing, we have a long way to go. And I do believe that right now, there's a fantastic opportunity. The Prime Minister of India has spoken multiple times on the national education policy. We have the education minister convening meetings of vice chancellors and engaging with them. We have the AICTE chairman, the UGC chairman, the NAT chairman. So there is what you call a collective consciousness that has been built around the national education policy for people to galvanize both intellectual consciousness as well as governance consciousness when it comes to how NEP can be implemented. But I will quickly say, I believe 5 things need to be done if you want to have the NEP to be successful. First of all, we need to build trust. Right now, there is widespread distrust with regard to the higher education institutions on one hand, the regulatory bodies on the other, and government agencies as well. We need to build trust, we need to build respect, and we need to build collegiality for NEP to be implemented. Second, we need to focus on transparent decision-making and accountability-based mechanisms for NEP to be implemented at a regulatory side. Third, we need to focus on a lot more autonomy and independence of HEIs themselves. A lot more. And that's already happening. If you look at the graded autonomy policy, if you look at
there are policy interventions to ensure that already.
Institute of Eminence policy, these are all in that process. And the fourth, I would say, is active and participative consultation. And the fifth, I would say, is we need no less than the Prime Minister or the HRD Minister task force, which should be literally be present in the ministry and reviewing and continuously ensuring that the NEP is implemented. If we do all of this, we will be in a good situation towards implementing policy, because many things that NEP wants requires the state government, the central government, the regulatory bodies, including subject-based regulatory bodies, the state education councils. So there are a lot of other things that we need to do. That NEP is implemented.
Right. Professor Rajkumar, what I take away from what you said is that implementation continues to be a concern. We've been speaking to a lot of stakeholders. I'll take that question to Mr. Ramanathan Ramanan. But before that, I'll come to Mr. Narayanan Ramaswamy, sir. Another focus of the NEP has been about access and equity. How can India solve the problem of generating supply of education in the most disadvantaged areas?
Okay, so let me start by thanking Economic Times and upGrad for this wonderful event. So if you ask me, jumping straight onto the question, access and equity at the school education level has actually been a phenomenal success, if you ask me. Some of the programs that has happened in the past 20 years, if you look at the gross enrollment ratio that is happening in the primary education and secondary education, I think we have had enough success in the access and equity part. The real concern is quality. It's not about accessing that. And in fact, I've seen a lot of, aspirational districts and how we should have an education institution in the aspirational district. My take would be higher education institutions are a destination. There is a difference between how you do school education and how you do higher education. When it comes to school education, you need to reach out to the place where the people live, and you need to have schools in every district kind of stuff, so that primary, secondary education happens. But when it comes to tertiary education, I'm not so sure whether it is prudent to start having educational institutions in every district and every aspirational district, because just the capital associated with building this is phenomenal. And I don't think we're going to have budgets to build such kind of institutions. And that is, in that sense, again, I would actually refer to Professor Raj's point. It is the private sector that has been providing access and equity for a lot of time now. And this was, in my view, a golden opportunity to bring about the private sector funding into this. And what are certain subtle things that are happening is, even now educational institutions borrow money from banks and they pay an interest. So it is not as if everything is happening on philanthropy. When you lend money and pay interest, you are actually giving back money. Why is it not that we are allowing equity to come into the education sector? And why is it after a social stock exchange that we don't have private money that can flow into building more educational institutions? So I think one of the big answer to it, which is like a trend that we already see in Indian higher education, is to allow private sector to play a meaningful role. And again, to the point Professor Raj said, remove the skepticism around this. There is genuinely some of the high class, world class, whatever way you put it, students who come out of these institutions. So why don't we allow that to happen? That is one. The second part, to answer your access question, again, I think there was, and there perhaps still is, a golden opportunity, is to truly integrate vocational education with higher education. We have a certain notion about what is vocational education. I work a lot, KPMG and I work a lot in vocational education, and I see the stigma attached with what is called as a vocational education across the country. Now, a pilot is also vocationally trained. A plumber is also vocationally trained. Both of them
is also vocationally trained.
Is also vocationally trained. And all I'm saying is, if you are looking at education that is oriented towards a job. What is wrong with that? And I think we need to have such feeder institutions that is going to be more tuned towards direct employment and professional education, call it vocational, call it professional, and that should coexist with this. NEP definitely talks about integration. It is very good from an overall, at a policy level, at a directional level. I think we need to interpret that NEP, and like Professor Raj and others mentioned, we need to have a forum by which we involve the powers to be, who will make sure the implementation kind of is inclusive, gets the private sector, gets vocational education into this, so that the masses, we are now talking about a huge Indian population that is ready for higher education. This cannot happen just by building more educational institutions in the aspirational districts or more educational institutions per se.
But perhaps that is where upGrad comes in, right? Phalgun, this question is for you. So how can you go really beyond the tier 1, tier 2 cities and reach the vast areas of India, which are truly perhaps underprivileged? You're on mute, Phalgun.
No, absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that has been the vision for upGrad when we started off. And I think the challenge everybody is aware of that one is access. But when we say access to education, it is not just when we talk in the digital context, providing a recording of a lecture, right? It is a lot more than that in terms of how can you give high quality education that actually delivers on learning outcomes and career outcomes for people in, as you said, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 India. And that's where one of the opportunities, and that is something that is really exciting, and I think it's a great moment for us right now, is the opportunity for India to leapfrog some of the existing trends. We have done that on multiple counts. For example, from landline to mobile phones, or from terrestrial broadcasting to satellite broadcasting, where we have a few steps. And I think that is where, when we look at the scale of the challenge in India, we believe that setting up a world-class digital infrastructure to enable learners to achieve their learning outcomes and career outcomes is very exciting, and it's a great opportunity for us right now that we cannot miss. And that's the kind of work that we've been doing in collaboration with some great universities to see how we can work with the faculty, one, create these programs, and then also offer them at scale. And this is not just for formal degrees. Even when you think of working professionals, right? We have about 60, 70 million people doing white collar jobs in India, and all of them over the next 1 or 2 decades will need to continuously learn to remain relevant and make India a very strong and new age economy. And I think that's where this digital infrastructure and making sure that we're able to deliver those world-class learning and career outcomes at scale becomes really important.
Yeah, digital infrastructure is a question I'll take to Professor Sahasrabudhe. But before that, Professor Rajkumar raised a question, and I'll bring that to Mr. Ramanathan Ramanan. So there's while the NEP is being hailed as a great vision document, there is some bit of doubt about the implementation. Your thoughts on that, sir? You're on mute, sir. You're on mute.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sujatna. Yeah, I think it's a very important point that has been brought out, and that is, we have a very good plan on paper. How do you make sure that we implement? And from my perspective, actually, the Honorable Prime Minister, in his clarion call for Atmanirbhar Bharat, really laid down the foundation of implementation of any initiative in India if you really want to have Atmanirbhar education as well as Atmanirbhar Bharat. First and foremost, he said, you have the pillar of the demographic dividend. How do you ensure that the benefits of education and this job enabling education, whether it is in the vocational area or whether it is in the higher order of skills, how do you ensure that our demographic dividend has access and leverage the demographic dividend? Because that's a very important pillar. And that's where the questions of access and equity and all of that come in. The second is the pillar of infrastructure that he mentioned. It is not enough for us to say it is just going to be the digital medium by which we are going to revolutionize education. That is still some way off. How do you ensure that the physical infrastructure as well as the digital infrastructure both are developed? You need the digital highways to be able to reach the remote places of the country. You also need smart infrastructure, smart cities. We have got 8,000 towns and cities in our country, but we have only 8 tier 1 cities. And if you're going to have the best educational institutions only in the 8 tier 1 cities, you're not going to be having a sustainable model of growth. So it is very important for us to be able to implement the necessary infrastructure. In fact, we have enough number of schools, we have enough number of colleges, and we have enough number of universities. That's not the problem. The problem is, do we have world-class infrastructure in each of them, or smart enough infrastructure to deliver quality education? The third is the pillar of demand. The pillar of demand means the focus on vocational skills is as important as the focus on deep tech learning, research, innovation, and so on. You are having 1.3 billion people. And so how do we ensure that the needs and the demands of the 1.3 billion people are met? And that is why it is important to have vocational recognizing. Vocational education as a very important part, and as important a part as higher education that has been conventionally accepted. And therefore, the ease with which you are able to move people who are going into vocational skills and giving them the option and recognizing it as something that is very important to society and to our country is very
How do
important.
you remove the stigma, which is,
The stigma has been removed by the NEP by saying that you're giving the options, the various options for people who are having vocational skills training, and they're giving credits to that, and from that you are able to move on to get a degree. This was missing in our earlier education. So you always got branded as vocational skill is something which is at a lower level and you cannot advance to a higher skill. But that has been addressed from the point of view of the plan. We have to implement it. And then the pillar of socio-economic growth, which means you cannot let the social divide, the digital divide, be still prevalent. How do you overcome the digital divide? And therefore, affordability of education is very important. You have to make sure that the girl child is also focused on, and they get equal priority. That differently able people who are very talented and who are very innovative, they get a chance. So that equity has to be brought, and so socio-economic good has to be addressed. It is not just economic progress. And finally, the pillar of technology. This is where you have to leverage technology to the hilt. If you don't leverage technology to the hilt, which is becoming affordable, available, accessible, and advanced, and to extend the digital highway to the remotest parts of our country, and you were talking of aspirational districts, the rural India, and so on. In fact, at Atal Innovation Mission and all of these, this is what we are focusing on. The community innovation centers that are being set up across the country are in rural India, tier 2, tier 3 cities, so that they become hubs of learning, innovation, and job creation. Similarly, the incubators that are being set up in universities is giving everybody the opportunity. Every university, world-class university, if they say we are having a world-class university, they should have a world-class incubator, because you are giving the students an opportunity to exercise their innovative capability and convert it into a startup or an entrepreneurial entity, and that is required. And finally, you have to introduce at the school level. So that's why the tinkering labs has been a great implementation from our side, I would say, which has proven itself in the excitement it has created, in the innovative quotient that is being generated in the young students from between grade 6 to grade 12. I mean, give them the empowerment, the tools, and suddenly you're finding amazing innovations. Actually, many of the innovations are available on Google Play Store by young students, grade 6 to grade 12. That is what gets unleashed when you give the opportunity, the exposure, and the empowerment through tools, technology, and access. So that is what I think implementation means, embracing all of this, the 5 pillars that Atmanirbhar Bharat stands for, and thereby ensuring access, equity, affordability, quality, as well as accountability, which the Honorable Prime Minister has mentioned are the cornerstone, the critical success factors of your new educational program are these 5 things. And in order to achieve those 5, you have to follow the 5 pillars that you have talked about.
Professor Sahasrabudhe, I have a question for you. It is perhaps slightly away from the NEP. My question is that another thing about education in India is the social obligation. Now, even higher education is highly subsidized in India. My question is, how can we stop the misuse of this subsidized education at premier technical institutes? Should an engineer from, say, an IIT be allowed to then pursue MBA from another premier institute, which is also subsidized, and then perhaps go abroad to sell soaps?
I think this is requiring a lot of mindset change. So you cannot make rules for not allowing something to happen, but at the same time, unless the opportunities are visible to students, I think they will not be able to change that tradition which they have been following for quite some time. And recent statistics shows from IIT Delhi, the last couple of batches, not even 5% of the students went abroad actually for taking up jobs. In fact, they all are starting their startups. So that itself is a big change which is happening. They will either do jobs in India or they are doing some startups of their own. I think this mindset change will happen when they find opportunities within the country. As Ramanan rightly pointed out, when Atmanirbhar Bharat takes off in a big way, there are huge amount of opportunities which will exist. I think that is the call of the time, actually. And I think I would like to counter Rajkumar, because he was saying about private entities being not given any place in the new education policy. Very categorically, it is stated that as far as research funding is concerned, under national research funding, there will be both private as well as government sector will be taken as equal entities or equal partners. I think that's a very big change which is happening. Gradually, even DST, DBT, they have started funding private agencies, but gradually it is increasing in number. So I think new policy will come into that. As far as the regulatory framework is concerned, the policy talks about the regulation will be light but tight, and a single regulatory agency rather than multiple agencies like UGC, AICT, NCT, and so on and so forth. They're all going to be dissolved by an act of parliament, and a single agency will come up with 4 verticals, one of them doing regulatory work, second one doing funding work, third one doing accreditation work, fourth one will set the standards. So standard setting bodies will be there, which will be taken up by the regulatory body. That is part of the Higher Education Commission of India, an apex body which is going to be created. And therefore, let all the private players who provide 70% of the education be rest assured that the entire process of regulation itself will be based on self-disclosure rather than inspections. And that itself is a big change which is talked about in this policy. But at the same time, the last 2 pillars which Ramanan talked about, the affordability and accountability, I think private sector has to be forewarned about that. They cannot make money out of this. They have to be transparent in their dealings. I think that is where tightness will come from the regulatory body.
Professor Rajkumar, you want to comment on this?
Yes, I appreciate Professor Satyapade's point of view.
Sure.
The real challenge in India is that how do you make distinction between institutions which are performing even in the private sector with the kind of values of the public sector. The fact remains that we don't have enough resources in the public sector, so there needs to be a larger set of incentives created for private sector to invest in higher education. And I have always believed that we need to focus on a strong not-for-profit philanthropic culture of private sector institutions if we really want to address it. But the point which I still would argue is that we should also not assume that the government and regulation will have answer to all our problems. And that's something which we need to move on. And I do believe that the spirit of what many things that the government is right now doing does recognize that. I want to draw your attention to an absolutely amazing book by an American political scientist, Peter Schuck. And the title of the book is Why Government Fails So Often and What We Need to Do About It. And in which he talks about the 6 aspects in which we need to get public policy right if we want to get regulation right. First, incentives. Second, instruments. Third, information. 4, adaptability. 5, credibility. And 6, management. There is no greater public policy aspect than higher education, in which all these 6 aspects will play very strongly. And that's why I believe we need to have a reimagination of the role of the government and regulators when it comes to higher education. Because frankly, universities are, expected to be responsible institutions.
Yes.
People who are professors who understand how to be able to govern institutions, they need to be given more power and recognized for what they are. This impinges directly on the ideas of academic freedom, institutional autonomy, and independence, all of which has been actually recognized quite strongly in the national education policy. In a way, my point is, let universities decide what they need to do. There is no society in the world where if universities are not given complete autonomy as to what they are, you cannot build a world-class university system. World-class higher education system assumes and presumes that universities need to be autonomous.
Professor Srivastava, you wanted to say something? Yes, please. Very strong words coming in from Mr. Rajkumar. Yes,
no, I agree with Professor Rajkumar. You're right on the money. There are a couple of things that we haven't talked about. One is that we were talking about theory and practice, the bridge between them. And on the practice side, there also needs to be an engagement of the education system with industry. So, we turn out graduates who are not employable, and therefore companies like Infosys have to run Infosys Academy to retrain them. So why can't we have a closer collaboration, experiential learning, if you will, between the academic institutions and the corporate sector? That's one thing. The second is that if we're going to make progress, we need more competition. And the greater the competition will come from the private sector. We also have to let in foreign institutions, because somebody has to bring in the capability and the number of teachers that we need. So there's, if you're going to train, a few million, people to get the demographic dividend, the question is who's going to do it? And in the short run, the greater the amount of competition, the greater the amount of autonomy to the private sector, that is what's going to bring in resources. By the way, on the resource part, there's no shortage. If I'm in Mumbai, and in those days, when you talk to a taxi driver, they were spending 30-40% of their monthly earnings on their children's education. I know middle-class parents who are taking their life savings and spending it on, sending their child to Canada, Australia, something like that. So there's no shortage of money on behalf of the public to get a good education. So the question is, how are we going to get good education? And one element really is we need more competition in that. We need to loosen the constraints, and we need to go after performance. I love the policy of the self-disclosure. Yeah. And it's the public that's going to make a judgment on the quality of education. And one of the things that I learned in Singapore was that the government published statistics on the educational institutions. And so the employment statistics and how well the students were doing, they published the input, the SAT scores and this like that. So if the government will play the role of information disclosure so that students and parents can make the right decision, that's the role they should play, and then let the market take care of issues. So the point that Dr. Rajkumar made about information is absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And the government needs to let the market regulate.
Yes, I'll come to say it with that. Yesterday in our conversation, you mentioned a very beautiful thought. That is, how can you, the government, as well as the industry collaborate to make NEP effective?
Right. So certainly there's one simple issue of resources. I'm so impressed with the NEP's new research policy that provides research grants to help universities and institutions such as IIM Calcutta progress in a very important and fundamental aspect of helping education produce. But I think that I'm also very impressed with the idea with the light governance. Educational institutions absolutely require autonomy to be able to flourish, but simultaneously, when we talk about information disclosure, what is that information disclosure oriented towards? There must be some standards, and those standards must be worldwide standards, standards that are accepted in a global context for us to be able not only to invite new competition, but also to compete with the players that are, no question about it, going to enter the Indian market. This is a time of opportunity, not just for us who are players in India, but for educational institutions from around the world to make put their feet on the ground and collaborate. So I think one of the important things that the government can do is also to encourage collaborations between players in the Indian market, players from overseas, to be able to leverage the best of the best to take to create the growth that we're seeking. And this is inevitably going to require some degree of e-education, online learning, a learning model which encourages that both the network creation that happens on the ground with students in meeting each other, learning from each other in campuses, but also capitalizing on the opportunities to learn from the best around the world. These are all features that the government can encourage with the autonomy and the light governance.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. We have close to 350 attendees, and there are close to 40 questions that have come in. I have to, before we end this session, I have to take a few questions. This question is for Narayanan Ramaswamy. Question is that engineering institutes are far away from corporate reality. I have spoken to you earlier in the year for a story that I was doing, and you had spoken about the huge catch-up that Indian education has to do. So this question is from Archana Chindarkar, and she's asking, how really can that gap be bridged?
Okay, let me understand the question. If it is as if Indian educational institutions, particularly engineering education, is far away from industry, there are two parts to it. Like if it is the same Indian education from the IITs who are producing some world-class leaders, like who are great engineers, scientists, and others, maybe it's the same education system that has produced engineers who are not even employed. So I think the question is more in terms of how there's no point in talking about a larger curriculum or the larger ecosystem in which it's operating. It is the individual unit and their ability to work closely with the industry that, in my view, is going to be important. And particularly in engineering education, and then connecting to NEP, if it is going to be multidisciplinary, if we are going to have an engineering education that is also going to have shades of how do you survive in the world, not just knowing the theory part of it, the other aspects of it, I think that will help. And second, like I said before, engineering education is not all about the 4-year degree program that we have. That is just one of the ways of doing engineering. There are so many other things that multiple entry and exit that NEP suggests is going to be huge opportunity for us to actually define something that is more industry ready, that is more relevant, and also give the option for students to decide what should they learn and when should they learn. So some of the answers are in NEP, but it is going to largely depend on how the institution is going to look at aligning itself with its objective, aligning with the industry, and making sure that they are relevant for them.
There's a question from Krishna for Phalgun. The question is that when there is such a surge in online education and non-contact education, what is the kind of accountability that should be expected from the platforms such as upGrad?
I think, thanks a lot for that question. I think we measure ourselves by two standards of accountability. And I think both of them are from an outcome standpoint. The first is learning outcomes. So for us as an education platform, the most important thing is to say that if we're teaching somebody data science, at the end of the course, that person should be a world-class data scientist from a learning outcome standpoint. And I think that's the first accountability that we hold ourselves to. The second part is on career outcomes. So a lot of people talked about how our engineering colleges are disconnected from the corporate world, but how do we make sure that the courses that we are creating, the kind of learning experience that we provide, eventually leads to career outcomes and career acceleration for learners? I think those are the two metrics that I think everybody should be held accountable to make sure that we increase the attractiveness of the entire education system.
There's a question for Professor Sahasrabudhe. The question is that perhaps in the Indian youth is hesitant in taking up vocational skill courses due to the shortage of pay and the culture. How can NEP help overcome that? Yeah.
I've been answering most of the questions. I've already answered some 15, 20 questions here. So I think I'm doing parallel processing here. I think the skill sets which our students have to get it right from school time to when they come to higher education. And in the new policy where we talk about multidisciplinary universities on one side, and also having ability to integrate between vocational education and the normal technical education. And one can quit at any stage, after 1 year or 2 years, if they find that they are not suitable for one particular type of task, and then get into another one, that is lateral exit and entry into another system. I think these kind of empowerments will make people aware that people who are not fit for engineering may come to vocational education and develop their skills, and vice versa. I think that is where in the society gradually diploma in vocation and bachelor of vocation, which are generally taken as something inferior, will also get its own value. And when industry starts appointing such people and get better salaries than engineers, probably the level playing field will be created in due process of time.
There's one more question, that the very last question I'm taking from the audience. The question I open up to all of you, whoever wants to answer. The question is that NEP is talking about doing away with most of the regulators in the education sector with one umbrella regulator. Does that mean could that mean that accountability will go down in the education sector, especially say of teachers in the rural areas? Whoever wants to take it. The question has.
I had already answered that in part earlier, so I think if you want, I can continue. But others, if someone wants to pitch in,
somebody else wants to pitch in.
I would welcome that to happen. Actually,
I think the NEP does provide for accountability, and I don't believe that. And also, we need to understand that accountability is not necessarily driven as a top-down model. Accountability can also be more democratic, more inclusive, more internally engaged, and also in a university context, it's all about how the recipients of that knowledge and experience value that outcome as well. So I think it's very important that we should be very conscious of not applying the principles of accountability in a corporation or a business enterprise and the way it functions to how a university functions. Universities function in a completely different framework when it comes to accountability.
I think I want to tell a simple anecdote which Prime Minister Modi ji himself said in one of the meetings, that in the schools, we find that in rural schools, the actual teachers who are appointed, they don't go at all. They outsource people. And therefore, he said every school should be asked to put up the large photographs of the teachers into the school so that they know who are the teachers appointed. Maybe the photograph which is bigger than the Prime Minister or President of India, so that they one side feel elated that they are bigger than the Prime Minister, and on the other side students will know who is the teacher, who is not a teacher, who is coming to class is not a teacher. I think
Ms. Seth, you want to say
Yes, this actually picks up on both of the points made previously. Accountability must be accompanied by transparency of information. So going to Professor Sahaswabudha point, the idea that there are large photographs of the notional teachers will help with that transparency. So these are two sides of the same coin. We have to have transparency. We have to have information symmetry so that our audiences understand what it is that they're expected to gain and learn. We are able to gain whatever whatever is being promised. So I think that the new educational policy stresses both of these points, the transparency as well as the accountability. I think the governance practices going forward for the regulators is to how to put that into place, because it's not an easy act to accomplish, but all power to the policy to make it happen.
Absolutely.
If I may just add, yeah, I think when we talk of accountability and all of that, at the end of the day, it is the young student who is out there who is going to feel the results of this accountability. And therefore, it is very important for educational institutions to hold themselves accountable to three things. One, are they inspiring a culture of learning in the students? Are they inspiring a culture of problem solving, innovative thinking? Are they inspiring them to become not just a job seeker, but to be able to realize their full potential as in whatever area of interest that they have? So that is the one part. The second part of accountability is the enablement. Are you enabling this? You may be inspiring them, but are you enabling them through the ecosystem, through the teachers, through the mentors, through the Gurukul that you talked about right in the beginning? How are you enabling this ecosystem in terms of access to quality infrastructure, quality education, quality training, quality teachers, remote mentoring, so on and so forth. The third is the accountability in terms of implementation. Mm-hmm. How are you ensuring that you are actually implementing the schemes that the NEP is talking about in theory and making it real in practice? So that has to be accountability there. When you are saying that, for example, I'm going to give equal voice and equal importance to vocational training, which is very important in our country. There was discussion on autonomy for private sector. World-class institutions can only happen if you make them fully autonomous. That is true, but that is not going to be possible in the near future for our 8,000 tier 2, tier 3 towns and cities, our 600,000 villages, our 715 districts, out of which 115 are aspirational districts. The government will have to play a role in all of this. If you are thinking by some magical wave of a wand, you're going to create an autonomous ecosystem of universities in these places where you have to pay. I mean, if you have to get into the top class institutes in India, an ISB or IIM or whatever, it costs a lot. It's not easily affordable, and rightly so, because they are trying to give world class education, and world class education requires world class infrastructure. But in the meantime, how do you deal with the 1.3 billion people and 150 million young students out there? So you have to have a practical combination of accountability. Government money and funding comes, how do you become accountable, and how do you ensure that the implementation of the intent behind that is happening? Then you have true accountability, and that is what is going to result in a world-class educational system.
I have completely run out of time, but I'll take quick. I think there is a quick points that Professor Rajkumar.
I want to quickly respond to one thing that we do recognize the demographic diversity, but we should be very clear. Our aspiration should match with what we do. So we can't say, oh, we want to build world-class universities. We want to be in the top 100 in the world, and then constantly not take efforts that are needed. In fact, our Prime Minister understands this very well. When he talked about the ease of doing business rankings, we need to play. If you want to be part of these things, you then recognize that this is the global competition. So you either decide we don't want to be part of rankings, we don't want to be part of the top 100, and we handle what we have to deal with. But if you want to be part of the top 100, then we do exactly what those top universities around the world do to be part of that.
Okay, I'll go to Narayanan before I come to Professor Srivastav. Yes, please, quickly.
So my quick take is on the regulators. Multiple regulators doesn't mean better compliance. Multiple regulator only means more work and those who comply. To me, making the regulations simpler and easy to comply and make it difficult for people who don't comply to survive will be the mantra. So having more regulators does not help at all.
Right. Okay, Professor Srivastav.
So I really want to emphasize capability building. I'm talking about faculty and teachers. And I also want to put in a plug-in for upGrad. India is not the United States. We don't have 6,000 universities trying to fight, a legacy system that's trying to fight change. We have quite a few million youngsters that need to be trained. So while we can dream about the IITs and the IIMs and the ISBs, a lot of people need training. And, we've seen it in cell phones. India will use leapfrogging. And I think, we need to invest in the technology, but we also need to invest in the content. So just the technology by itself isn't going to do it. And so we need to rethink. It's not a good idea to simply follow the West. We need to look at what are the needs of India. And I think we're going to need quality, but we're also going to need scale. And the scale will come from technology, which is being resisted in the West. All the universities that are trying to go out of business, they're working hard at trying to resist the upgrads of the West. So
Point taken, Professor Srivastav. Point taken. Lessons from the West, lessons from the West University, but indigenization is perhaps the key word, right?
And scale. We need scale, We really, really need to educate millions and not thousands.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to add to that, I think I completely agree with Professor Srivastav, and that's why we said that the next global world-class edtech solution is going to come from India and not from the US or Europe, because I think the need in India...
Because the demand is here in India.
Yeah, the scale, the need in India is disproportionately large, and I think that innovation is something that we need to build towards, and I think that's the vision that we want.
Absolutely. We've completely run out of time. Thank you very much once again for joining this panel. It's been an invigorating panel to begin this summit with. With that, I will hand over the baton to my colleague Alokesh Bhattacharya for the next panel. Alokesh.
Thank you, Suchetna. Thank you all.
Thank you all of you.
Thank you. Take care.
Alokesh, you're on mute.
Okay. Now I'm unmuted. Thank you
Yes.
all panelists, gentlemen. Thank you very, very much. And thank you, Suchetna, for that opening session. It was, like you said, truly invigorating. And we'll look forward to catching up with you in the next panel. Thank you. Now, it was a fantastic panel, you have to agree. And of course, one of the key takeaways from that is that social growth is as important as economic growth. Is one of the points that was raised. And my personal belief is that for that to happen, social growth must tie into economic growth, and education has to be at the foundation of that momentum. Professor Anju said of IIM Calcutta, she spoke of how online education can help, that movement and how we can get more people to come into the education thing. Now, so that is in fact the subject of the second panel, which we will now start, where the subject of the second panel specifically is online higher education, a $5 billion opportunity. Indeed, if anything, the COVID-19 pandemic would have taken that opportunity up significantly. Let me introduce the panel to you. We have with us today Anil Kumar, the CEO and founder of Redsea, Mayank Kumar, co-founder and managing director of upGrad. Gentlemen, as I call your name, kindly switch on your cameras. We have Vivash Nayak, executive vice president, HR, L&D and administration of HDFC Life. We have Anurag Seth, VP and head of talent transformation at Wipro. We have Sonia Kutti, head of global human resources at Quest Global. And we also have Vivek Pathak, the former group chief digital officer of Reliance Capital. Okay, I can see only 3 cameras. Others need to switch on your cameras, please. Yeah, all right, wonderful. Great to see all of you here. Thank you so very much for joining us on this panel. And we will, of course, talk about the opportunity that is afforded by online higher education, talk about the challenges that industry faces in hiring the right people, solutions they've found, what can we do to overhaul our engineering education, through the online system, whether online education is taken seriously at all. It never used to be, 20 years ago, whether it's taken seriously today by you when you're hiring people. These are things that we want to discuss because the audience would also like to know what are the trends in the industry area. So I'll start this, and I would like this to be a group kind of discussion, the kind that we saw in the first panel. So anytime you have a point to make, just raise your hand and say, just jump into the discussion, okay? Don't only wait for me to ask you questions. So we'll start with Anil. And Anil, this $5 billion by 2025 is a very fascinating number. We were talking about it yesterday also. Perhaps you could just decode that for us.
Sure. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I think one of the panelists in the previous discussion was talking about India has a problem of scale. And it just happens that when I was reflecting on today's panel discussion, scale was the biggest thing which came to my mind as well, that, India has a problem or a challenge with education, which is unlike any other country. We have about 40 million graduates, undergraduates at various years in India, and we have about 50 million white-collar workers. So put together something about 100 million of white-collar professionals plus the folks who are at a various levels of education system. So now that's a massive number, right? 100 million.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at the opportunity of these folks getting education, whether it is in terms of the full-fledged degrees or continuous learning, which is at the later stage of even their working, increasingly, there is an importance which is being assigned to the online education. Of course, there's this whole, there are 2 or 3 things which happened, by the way, right, in last few months and year. So NEP, of course, has liberated how various students can really go after education. So it is free of geographic location. It is free of what kind of places, what kind of time scale you can get it. You can have the access to credit bank and all that stuff. So that has made online education a lot more lucrative. The second bit is acceptance of online education from the COVID, right? So we've been forced into this situation where people are getting educated by COVID. So online education is mainstream now. I mean, last 6-8 months, it's become more mainstream. People have started taking it a lot more seriously. And then there's a flurry of activity which has happened from investors' side. Byju's, by the way, is the largest online education company across the world, right, on the K-12 side. Then there are folks like upGrad which are coming in. So there's from the supply side as well, there's a bunch of activity which is happening. So between these three things, I think there has been a lot of impact which has come onto the student side. And we did thousands of surveys over the last 2 years on the student base as well as on working professionals to understand what is their readiness to go after the online education. And we've seen that if we talk about the working professionals, 80 to 85% of working professionals says that they find value in the continuous learning, which means even post they have really started working, they understand that the education will really add value to them. And almost 25 to 30% of them say that they would prefer online education for this kind of education journey. And similarly on the undergrad and the postgrad side as well, we see almost 10 to 15% of the students saying that they would be preferring the online education rather than going to some of the offline universities. When you just sum it up all together, then you have a significantly high number of students as well as working professionals ready to go for online educations, and they believe that their degree will be really valued by the potential employer. And that's where this number of 5 billion is coming in from our very recent study.
Right. Thank you very much. And that's quite a decoding, and it's very, very interesting. We tend to take a little more, seriousness, this online education thing. The unfortunate part is that not everybody has access, right? There was a statistic that came through, I think, a couple of days ago, which I noticed in a paper, which says that 80% of the government school children don't have access to online education. And so their education is completely stopped since the lockdown began, which is unfortunate. But there are certain things that are in our control, certain things that are not in our control. But I would generally ask questions to the whole group, and I'd like you to discuss and deliberate on these. So, for example, I would start off with this, this number that Anil has given, and this acceleration in online education. It is like Anil said, this Byju's, this upGrad. There are many others, right? And upGrad is also doing a phenomenal job. And it's all about online, right? So, how do you see, as HR heads and as technology heads of your organizations, you are the ones who are responsible for taking the organization forward, right, on the technology thing, and making sure that your workforce doesn't get stale and their skills don't get outdated. So how do you see this entire, this online higher education, this acceleration in the online higher education, especially in the need for organizations like yours to continuously upskill your employees? Right. So maybe I'll start with Vivek, and then anybody else can join in.
Sure. So thanks, Alokesh. See, even before I get down to the needs of the corporate world, as far as this upskilling and reskilling is concerned, let us also acknowledge a fundamental truth that the era of linear living is over. For every individual across the world, whether he's part of formal education or currently employed, I mean, this once in a lifetime kind of a change that we are all witnessing has definitely accelerated. But the classic model of education, I will do this and then I will do higher education that will lead to a certain amount of a job and an opportunity, which will lead me to a certain amount of linear growth. I think time has come to acknowledge that that model doesn't work. The human mind is ultimately a pattern seeking tool. If, then else. If I work hard, then I get into a good university, and then I land into a good job, and then. And if it doesn't happen, I just fall off the cliff. The thing is, there is very little evidence now that you can keep faith in any pattern for any long. And especially given the way we are connected in the digital world today, the world is way too complex for anybody to take a linear path, right? And let's face it, the education system that all of us, especially at least on this panel, that we have benefited from, does not cut it anymore. I mean, there is growing disharmony between the curriculum taught and the skills that are in demand. And with increased unemployment and probably even deepening student debts, because education is getting expensive. It's not like television where technology will start reducing the cost of television. education still requires a fair amount of intensive engagement, pedagogy, the trends that you need to catch up on, it may finally break the proverbial back of the camel that formal education claims to be. And in this brave new world that we are part of, I think degrees are going to become redundant. And learning has to, the degrees have to make way for, more skill-based. In terms of I mean, you're already seeing
vocational kind of training.
Companies like Apple, Google, where degree is no longer a prerequisite to apply. What is important is the skill set that you bring to the table.
Okay, who wants to come in? Anurag, you need to switch on your audio. Everybody can switch on audio now.
Yeah, so if I can just build on what Vivek said, he's right, that the skills are important here. What we try to look at is that when the engineering graduates whom we hire earlier, and we used to take them into the organization, typically about a couple of semesters back, we offered a pre-joining program. And in a pre-joining program, we will typically give them a lot of hands-on labs and virtual labs. Basically, it's all online. So it's virtual labs you give them. You give them some mentors so that they can learn and are ready to join the industry. And there we realized that the gap that they had in their understanding in the college versus what is required by the industry was quite significant, right? And while we worked on those gaps, and when the students came in, we definitely saw there is a big difference in their readiness, and their training time reduced significantly after they joined in. We tried to take that initiative even back to the colleges. So, for example, we looked at about 100 odd engineering colleges, where tier 2, tier 3 typical colleges, where we actually taught the professors. So we got the professors to our campus. We gave them, again, all programming practices and what is required by the students when they join the organization. And they went back, and through online mechanism, again, through virtual labs and training material and everything, we continue to teach them. And at the end of about 7-8 months, they got a Wipro certified faculty certificate, right? So that now that you are ready, about 300 professors we picked up in the first batches. And these 300 professors went and taught more than 10,000 students in their classes. So they kind of took up a curriculum, they taught the students. Now, where we found a blend between the engineering education, where it's a foundation, versus what reskilling you are doing to the students before they join the industry. So it is, they could join any other company, even our peer companies. And that initiative took up so much. And the people who joined our organization, we could see the difference between the caliber or the readiness, let me call it the readiness of those students versus the ones who had not gone through this particular program. And as we speak this year, we thought, is it really about engineering graduates? We actually went to the BSc colleges and say, okay, in the BSc colleges also, many science graduates joined the organizations and say, can we do that experiment? And we found the excitement level is quite significant. The number of colleges who actually applied for this program, we were actually staggered. We thought we had to request them that send your professors and do that. And then just for awareness, we call, let's say, some HODs and principals. There are about 100 HODs and principals who came to our campuses in several batches, and they were very interested to know what's happening to this particular thing. The point I'm trying to make is that definitely the colleges do realize that there is a gap between the readiness for the industry versus what is taught in the thing. I do agree to the point, I do believe in the point that it is not so much about reskilling as such, but it is about learnability for them. Because whatever skills we teach them, obviously, though, they are relevant on the day one when they join us. And to that extent, we find that their project deployability enhanced significantly. Within the first few weeks itself, these students became deployable. But the fact that when we taught the professors as to how you teach the fundamental concepts of programming to them, we may have picked up 1 or 2 languages, but then how you teach them those things became much more important thing. Because nowadays these guys are
how
much
are you
more
doing
ready
it now?
to learn.
Like right now, there's COVID and nobody is able to come to your campus. Professors will not be able to come to your campus right now.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So we did it with the campus, and now we are continuing the program. It's all happening online. Okay. And these professors spend some 4 to 5 hours a day for a period of 2 to 3 weeks, and they're all learning. Okay. And the programs are happening even now.
For all you know, they might leave professorship and get into industry. and join Wipro as a programmer.
No, I mean, the idea is that if we had to teach the students, those 10,000 students, there is no way we could have reached that scale.
Yeah, that's
so we
true.
thought the method of teaching the professors, certifying them, and they in turn teach the students.
That's
But
a
of
great
course,
move.
we
I
offer
think
all
it's
our
this
labs
whole
and
idea,
training content.
this whole idea that you have brought of reskilling before joining the industry is a great thing. Vivash, Sonia, I want you also to jump into this before I go to Mayank.
So Alokesh, if I can go next, is
Yeah, go ahead.
I think I completely agree with what Anurag said. It is even at Quest, what we have done is really partnering with institutions to make sure that the skill and the talent that comes into the organization is ready, right? Traditionally, organizations have spent those 30, 60, 90 days in getting these graduates who come in to become ready for the job that they're going to do, right? Now, a simple
Induction
fact.
training.
Absolutely, induction training, skill training, technical training, whatever we may call it. The fact of the matter is, and research will tell you that for any job, okay, any job that you take today, in 1 year, 10% increase in there is in the skills that are required to do that job within a year. So let's take a job that was relevant in 2017, okay, just as an example. And if you look at it today, about 30% of it would have changed. If that is the kind of skill that is required and is changing with every passing year, and any major significant events that happen actually accelerate this rate of change that we are talking about, then the need for academia as well as for organizations to be relevant becomes all the more important. Even if we are talking about 10% for each job, it's impossible for the internal organization, be it HR, learning and development, to do it on their own. Right. And that is why partnership, either with educational institutions or with firms like upGrad, become all the more relevant.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think one thing that we should, and a little bit of difference in what Vivek said, Alokesh, is that, when we say that it is going to become largely about learning online and coming with courses and not necessarily having a degree, I think it'll take a little bit of moment to say, why do we go after the degrees? Why do we go after the colleges? Right? When you try to hire a
job
person
without a degree.
Right. The point is, when you hire somebody from an institute of repute, right, you are ticking off on certain things which are required for you as an organization, as the person being a high performer. Yes, he's got good grades all throughout. Hardworking. Yes, he has worked through it. Right. Good understanding. Yes, she understands concepts very well. That is why we try to make our job easier by saying, if I hire from this college, these things are taken care for me. Then I have to focus on this balance that is required for me. Imagine trying to hire only through skills. The work for the organization increases. So somewhere the partnership also has to be that, I define as an organization what I need, and then that gets provided to me by ticking off those boxes. That is what is the bridge that needs to be. And if that is something that we do successfully as organizations to define and as partners to provide, then I think we have a win-win solution that will work.
Fantastic. And Vivash, just coming to you, in fact, life insurance is such a huge employer of people in this country, right?
Yeah.
So I'd love to know your perspective on this.
Yeah. So my thoughts are, when you build a learning ecosystem in the organization, the learning ecosystem needs to be robust. So you can't just depend on one type of, training resource to kind of train or skill your people. Whether it's offline, whether it's online, whether it's mobile learning, group learning, you got to have multiple elements in the learning ecosystem for you to kind of skill your people. Coming back to this question in terms of, life insurance, we kind of recruit close to around 8,000, 10,000 people every year. Getting people from the lateral market is not very easy. Or even when you kind of hire people from the lateral market, people come with a lot of baggage. So, as an organization, you tend to kind of go to campus and recruit freshers. Now, when you recruit freshers, the typical traditional way of recruiting is look for people from good colleges with degrees and kind of hire these people. But invariably, if you talk to any HR person, whether it's life insurance or otherwise, when you recruit people from colleges, you recruit them for the aptitude that they have. Invariably, 80% of them are not employable. When I say they are not employable, they don't have the requisite skills for them to be successful on the job. So how do you bridge the gap? And to bridge the gap, then you again put a training curriculum in place, either in-house, or you tie up with education providers, like online education providers like an upGrad, or maybe an offline education provider, who kind of design a course which is absolutely bespoke to your company requirements, train them, they get a degree, and they kind of get into the organization. I think what online does is it helps you scale up that need of yours. In an offline thing, you still expect these students who are graduates to kind of go on a campus and learn it for a period of 2 months, 3 months, complete that course, and then come to you. When it's online, I think the scalability is much, much higher. But having said that, I do believe that there's a place under the sun for both offline and online. I think online is scalable, and if the demand for these resources is extremely high, I think online is the way to kind of go. Especially if you're spread across the country and where you require people across the country, I think online is as a much more scalable model is the way I would look at it.
Fantastic. And online, of course, Mayank, just coming to you from the upgrad perspective, online is a huge thing. But we are also talking about the need for degrees and whether we really need degrees or not in future, like we were saying. Sonia's implication was that without a degree, nobody will even look at your CV, right? If somebody sends me a CV for a job in my team, graduate hai ya nahi, if you're not even a graduate, I'm not even going to look at you or call you or anything. My organization will not also allow, right? Most of our organizations have this thing built in. But this whole degree thing, doing a BSc or a BCom or a BA, and then doing a course with upgrad to get into an insurance job or get into a Wipro kind of job, this 3 years of wastage, right? Of that degree. Can we move away from that model? Do you think upgrad and others can move to a model where you don't need the degree, you need the skills, and you show the certificate for the skills? What kind of acceleration are you seeing towards that trend?
No, I think I'm on the camp that Sonia said. I think degrees are a very age-old caste system that the society has always sort of evolved into. So you don't know me, I don't know you. I ask you which college you are from, and if you tell me the name of the college, I get a broad sense of yours. So if you are from the double I's of the world, you are the top caste, and then sort of all those things people have created in their own minds that this caste
mostly in the mind.
Yeah, it's in
mostly
the mind.
in the mind, because I've known several people who are from backward villages and studying in the worst schools, and they get the best results.
Yeah. And I'm saying that caste system is also in the mind. I mean, there's no scientific methodology as to why this exists, why it does not exist. But it's an age-old understanding. And Sonia is right that, look, I mean, when you're inundated with a lot of CVs coming in, how do you sieve through something? And if there's a filter which says, let me filter with the degree type, it becomes easier. And therefore, it's an information asymmetry breaking, Alokesh, as I see it right now, that, look, I don't know much about you. And I will ask you, where did you study from? Therefore, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm taking a slightly more
that's fine.
In jest, I'm saying this point that if you see the matrimonial script also, right? I mean, you write down your height, you write down your skin color, you write down your caste, you write down your education. And therefore, I say it's of that zone that this is a very important sort of signaling parameter. Now, having said that, I do believe that what you get learned in that 3-year focused approach is very, very important. And I genuinely don't feel that 3-year, 4-year learning can be replaced with a 1-year online module. And I know Google of the world are talking about it. But I mean, you have to also appreciate to ask, why did degree exist the way it exists? And degree exists the way it exists is because in that 3-year, 4-year period, you have a very concentrated way in which a learner learns. And therefore, if you see most of the best institutions have got that high discipline, high rigor, high approach. Now, having seen the proliferation of a higher education institution, many places that has taken a dip. But if you look at how a Harvard teaches, how a Cambridge teaches, how an Oxford will teach, there's a very strong pedagogical tool which actually helps build the right curiosity, the right ability to learn, and the right ability to unlearn, which I don't think that a skill-based learning can offer that. So I do believe that higher education will continue to stay and do the job that is required to be done. But at the same time, Alokesh, what we will see and start having is just-in-time training or just-in-time education or lifelong learning, that you got the polio vaccination at one time. Now polio will not come to you, but at different points in time, you will require different kind of vaccination to stay relevant to what's happening in the infrastructure and ecosystem. So while we'll have a lot of conversation about degree disappearing, I don't see that happening at least in the next 5 to 10, 15 years, because I think there is a very strong rationale that they're solving for. We will have to build a parallel structure, what we're doing right now, and hope that we can imbibe a lot of best practices from offline and degree education and build a combination of skills plus degree education such that the person gets a holistic point of view, just rather than getting a piecemeal skilling aspect in the journey.
Absolutely. And in fact, lifelong learning seems frightfully long, but the fact is that it is a fact of life today, right? Which technology is changing. So the next question that I want to bring to this group is this lifelong learning, the lifelong reskilling or relearning, whatever you want to call it, how do you see online education playing a part in this? And how do you, for example, we have HR heads, we have an expert in Anil who does research, he understands. We have 3 HR heads over here, and we have a technology head in Vivek. I want to question you from your own perspectives about, what is it about online learning that can help in this, in this lifelong learning new paradigm that has come up? Because everybody needs to keep learning. Even doctors are taking tests now, right? After years.
I think the biggest advantage that online offers, and I'm sure Mayank probably would be able to add more color to this, is that it helps contextualize learning to the kind of environment that you're working in. So for example, if somebody is being hired at a remote branch for a life insurance company, there is a certain context in which that person operates versus getting somebody in the manufacturing space, what kind of context that he's operating. And that even goes true for even students. I have young kids. They love a lot of these cartoons like Minecraft, Roblox, and I don't know what all that stuff is. But now those programs, those cartoons actually give an opportunity to learn fundamental concepts of programming and fundamental computational concepts, right?
Correct.
So I think what online does open up an ability to contextualize the learning in the environment that you're versus getting into a bit of a universal platform, which probably university provides. When I say that the degrees may lose relevance, it doesn't mean that they go away. The only thing is we also need to solve for 1.3, like the panel before ours was talking about, that it cannot be the elites that are kind of running the show. There are still billions of people out there who need to get a fair shot at good life. And the classic problem with university, at least as it exists today, let's see how it plays out over the next couple of years, is that there is a high entry barrier. There is a high entry barrier to this. And the idea is to democratize to the extent that possible. Now, how do you do that? And today, the raw materials are in place. Data is cheap, platforms are open, and we have a whole new generation which knows how to interact with digital tools. Even stuff like NLP ensures that the gateway language, which typically has been English for any higher education, is no longer holding its unfair advantage over us. Somebody who is good, and IQ is never a subject of you knowing English. IQ can be across the world, anywhere. There could be some remote location where there could be a person who doesn't know a word of English, but he could, from an IQ level, he could be fairly well accomplished. NLP, machine learning, these models are now commoditized. They can help put the right context. They can actually bring the scale, and at a cost which makes it even financially viable for Mayank.
So, as a technology head, Vivek, if I were to ask you, there are 3 HR heads of very large organizations on this panel. What would you tell them what should be your approach to technology reskilling? They have huge tech workforces. Wipro is a tech company, right? But even a life insurance company and even Quest Global, they have massive technology workforces. What is the approach? Educating professors the way Anurag is doing is a fantastic way, but is there any other way?
So I would be preaching to the choir, but I'll tell you what we attempted and got some modest success at Reliance Group. There has always been this talk about, modernizing our workforce, and that is the classic conversations that we have during our annual plans, how to get these guys motivated. Should we herd them into a classroom and make them sit and listen to this lecture and give them some kind of snacks to get them excited? We said we'll take a slightly different approach. We said that we'll try to gamify some of the concepts that they need to learn in the context of their job. And to that extent, we actually made some forays towards building out very small mobile gaming apps where, for example, somebody at a junior level, the person who actually commutes 2 hours, and I live in Bombay, so I can talk about the Bombay context, who goes in a local train for 2 hours sitting instead of watching TikTok, you might actually do kind of a quiz, which probably adds to your credits. And at the end of the day, you're also learning some concept about sourcing, concept about RPF and stuff like that. So I think there are ways to put this in context, and something that we found some modest success in our organization, and it did not, it does not disrupt the existing L&D environment in a big way. In fact, if anything else, it's a welcome addition to what already is existing.
Just to add to this question, for the HR folks on the panel, as well as to Mayank and Anil, the point is that when you are hiring people from the market, right, we know what problems you're facing. Their skills are not matching with the skills that you need. And, Anurag, you've already given us one example of how you're solving it. But I'd like to hear more about how you're going to solve these things. Vivash, maybe you can give us some light.
Alokesh, I think for me, online education is scalable education. The traditional way is you identify the training needs, make a cohort of people, put them in a classroom and teach them. And there are a lot of limitations in terms of how many people you can train using this route. Online is you can curate a set of online courses, offer them to people, and people can pick up whatever they think is relevant for them. And this is location agnostic. This is training on demand. This is like, you offer a platter of different types of online courses to your staff, and they can pick up things that are relevant to them. You can gamify the whole thing, and you can have SOPs around in terms of, who's probably, and, so they can earn credits, and based on the number of credits that they earn, you can link it to their career growth, so on and so forth. But that's the other part. I think in simple words, online education is scalable education as far as, we are concerned.
Okay. Who wants to go?
Yeah, so just to add to,
No,
sorry,
go ahead, please.
yeah.
Go ahead.
So Lukesh, just to maybe summarize some other points which panelists spoke about, right? So I think in terms of the need of continuous learning and the benefits it brings to people, I think that's unquestioned, right? So everyone agrees that the skill sets requirement is changing so fast that whatever you learned 2 or 3 years back, a lot of it is getting redundant. So you need to sort of do a regular maintenance and overhaul of what you need to do. Now the question is, the challenge is all about execution. When I know that I need to keep on taking certain courses over a period of time, but I'm not taking as a white collar employee, then why am I not doing it? And that's where I think the execution related challenges are the ones which we need to really solve for. What we've observed, at least, that online education is able to solve for a lot of these execution related challenges, right? So if you need to just compare between how you need to go through this journey in an offline setup versus in an online setup, I think few things, right? So one is, of course, scale. So we've spoken about it at length. How can we make sure that the education is democratized and high quality education is available to all set of people, whether they are coming from the smaller cities, large city, different kind of education backgrounds or the languages. So at scale solution, online can do that. The second is from the location point of view. The other, your position in Kerala, you're in UP, small town, and Madhya Pradesh, wherever, right? So how can we ensure that irrespective of where you are, either long-term traveling or short-term traveling from your day-to-day office schedule, you are able to continue that? Online education is able to ensure that you are able to take that. The third bit is the self-paced, right? At what time do you take it? Do you want to take it over a weekend? Do you want to take it over a period of a month or 2 months or a year? Do you want to take it this year or next year? So there has to be time or self-pace around it. Online education is able to do that. Fourth bit is in terms of the benchmarks, right? You're doing an education program in isolation where you're being measured only against 5 or 10 people is of very limited use. One of the big things which online education institutes are able to do is put a benchmark saying that, hey, when we look at thousands of people, you are sort of at a 99 or 98 percentile, which online education is able to do with large databases of people and students who are enrolled with them over a period of time, a big benchmark. And the fifth one, which is probably one of the most important one, is the feedback loop, which runs through the industry. What you're learning and what industry is wanting, there's an agility which online education can really actually change for and really ask you to go with education which is more relevant. So I think these are 4 or 5 things which I can think
even
of.
the online educators need to be synced into the ground realities at times, right? To make sure that the feedback happens properly.
Exactly.
Sonia, Anurag, and Mayank in that order.
So, Alokesh, I was just thinking, what Anil said is actually the value of online education being anything, anytime, anywhere, right? That's what the benefit essentially is for an organization, for the employee, for a student in college, anywhere. I think the one important thing that sometimes we miss out on is that some things sound very, very appealing, very sexy. Okay. Right now, you see anybody and everyone in their spare time, what they want to learn is AI or machine learning, right? Because that seems to be the coolest thing to be involved in, to get educated on. The thing that is missed out is, sorry?
Is that true?
I think so. A lot of, I have
If you speak
a
with the
lot
case.
of, yeah,
For the benefit
I
of the
have
400 people who are listening in, they
I
should know
have
what
a
to go and learn.
lot of people in the organization who absolutely wanting to get into these fields, right? Because they think, hey, this is the next thing that is coming. This is what is going to be the future. The element that is missed out is how does that actually put into your overall career trajectory? Where does all this come in, right? So as organizations also, the impetus is also on us to ensure that what we are offering to people in some way makes logical sense to them. If I'm offering online education about XYZ course, which that person doesn't necessarily see how it fits into his or her career trajectory, I will not have takers for it. While I might tell the person, do it in a bus, do it on your way to work, the thing is the person doesn't believe in it. The what's in it for me is absolutely something that needs to be addressed, which is why today a lot of people, even without an organization telling them, are taking up courses on their own. Right, a lot of things that they think benefit them either on the personal or professional front, they take it on their own onus. It is easily available. I think that's the most brilliant thing about online education, that it's so easily accessible and it is in your time, right? If I had to do the same thing via a college or via a formal education system, it's a whole new type of thinking that I have to get into. How do I take time off? How do I go and attend? I think that's the brilliance that is there. So there is an interplay of how we position it and how we place it before a learning audience as well.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, I would get a little different element of continuous learning.
And while you
right?
finish
So,
what you're saying, Anurag, the other question that you need to answer is, would you hire somebody who's in online education, but not the reskilling kind of online education, but a graduate from an online education, like an IGNOU? That is the second part of the question.
I'll make an attempt to answer that. So, the point that I was talking about was continuous reskilling within an organizational context itself, right? So the technologies are changing. You have to keep on, people have to keep on learning. And as Sonia was saying, what is there for me? Why should I learn more technologies and things like that? So, and it sometimes become very difficult that, you move a person from a project, say, okay, 5 days you take off or 10 days you take off and go and do some training program. It doesn't work that way, right? Because you'll never get the best of the people who will get reskilled on the other things. Now, when you say online education, online skilling, let me call it, the way you are able to do is that if it's a program, it's an immersive skill program, all these, these sexy technologies that we're talking about, it takes about 120 hours to 150 hours for you to really spend some good amount of time, internalize the learning, do some hands-on and all that kind of stuff. Now, if you tell them, no, if you can spend 10 hours a week, let's say 2 hours a day or 10 hours a week beyond your regular project time, and you do it over a period of 3, 4, 5 months, and you get a certificate out of it, and that certificate has a value, that you become a full stack developer, or you become a AI engineer or machine learning engineer on this. Now people say that it goes back into their resume, whether the resume is used within the organizational context or it is used outside the organizational context. The fact of the matter is that you have done it for yourself because it adds to yourself, and you can do it in addition to the regular project work that you do. Because otherwise, if I'm working on a technology which is a legacy technology, nobody is going to move me onto a new age technology and say, okay, you take 3 months off, do this training and go into the new project. Now here I am. For me, I have got the opportunity that I can learn anytime, anywhere, any pace, any device. And all I need to do is to spend 10 hours a week, which could be on a Monday to Friday, 2 hours, or it could be just one Saturday or on something. And I finished that certification. And now I knock the doors of the organization or a neighboring organization to say that I am now ready, a full stack engineer, or I'm a machine language engineer. And now you hire me for that particular thing. Creates a different space in itself, and that is what is a use case that the online education is bringing to the table on this one. To your other question, whether we will hire people from who do not have a degree and we hire that, I don't think we will.
They have a degree, but they have an online degree.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so open university or online degree.
Yeah,
I don't think the organizational context we do that today. I mean,
exactly.
we don't do that, and some of the reasons I think Sonia had mentioned earlier, that, when you are taking somebody, it is not only about the skill that the individual possesses, but the person's what that person's competence is, the fact that he or she has done a degree from a reputed college or any college actually, which is our stream, it makes a difference to the person. And in fact, very interesting, thing that we try to do, that there are very good people in colleges which are not so-called empaneled colleges. Typically any organization will empanel some 100, 200 colleges that you will go to. And if there were people like in Far East in India, with those colleges may not be empaneled, but you could have very bright people who are staying there. So we started kind of a nationwide test that you conduct. Now from that test, you may even take very small 10% people, but there you are able to get to the caliber of the people that are all over the country. So you do take, but education is important because it creates a base for yourself. Colleges teach you soft skills also. Colleges teach you learnability element of it. They teach you the foundations. So I don't think we will do away with that thing that you don't have a degree, because online degree, you do not interface with people. You don't learn from your peers, right? You don't have in the college, there is a lot of interactions that you do. So a lot of personality development that happens is very important for an organization. To that extent, we definitely want that value. Reskilling is important for what the business needs.
Right. So Mayank, to come to you with this same question, and whether the fact is that should organizations like yours be focusing purely on reskilling? Because I believe you also are planning undergraduate courses, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we'll be doing online degrees as well. Yeah.
You'll be doing online degrees as well. So now an online degree from, an upgrad and an online degree from, a traditional Indian university or a college, you're going to be competing, right? So tell us a little about how you see the online, education thing panning out over the next 4-5 years.
Yeah, no, so for me, I think if 5 of them, my co-panelists can say that, look, we will hire online degree guys. I think ET gets the headline and we get the right mileage for upgrad. The 5 largest sort of recruiters have agreed to sort of hire without an offline degree and are looking at online degrees seriously. I think 2 things, Alokesh, what online degrees had been, and Anurag is quite correct in that context, that look, there is a perception that it is not rigorous. It does not involve as much of human interaction, and therefore it's a one-way learning. And therefore, what you're learning is not the most strong, and you have not gone through the rigor associated with a campus-based education. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I mean, I've had folks who come from a Navy background, never attended any college or university, always did through distance learning program, did our program, and is now one of the lead data scientists at Z5, which is one of the large OTT provider. There's a guy who actually, one of, Anurag's competitor went to the campus to another guy who was doing a program with us, with a campus program. Only one company visited. There was only one guy who was not hired, who was our learner. And after 4 years back, he did an online program, and he's now gotten an opportunity to work as machine learning engineer with Amazon in Canada. Wow. And that's a job that a guy from IIT and Stanford would aspire to get into. I think the beauty of online program these days, Alokesh, is that there is a fair amount of rigor that has come into, and that rigor results in some kind of outcomes. And I think as the industry matures, more and more of those successful results coming out of a guy who never had access to formal education, someone who was jobless at the end of the college education and getting into best institution. And a lot of our guys are working at very sort of strong projects at Wipro, at Quest, at Reliance, and at HDFC Life. Goes to show on that, look, over a period of time, we have to be at it. We have to generate strong success, because then if successful people go out, more people will start believing in the medium. And therefore, our approach is, let's build successful stories. That successful stories will get a lot of non-believers to believe in the model. And once we get to that level, I think it's just, everyone has said the positives about online education. We just need to now prove the efficacy of online education, which takes its own time, but we are at it, and we'll continue to build that efficacy and success stories to build the credibility of the system as well.
Yeah. So Alokesh, I think I wanted to comment, on Mayank, because I think there's a very key thought over there, right? The quality of what is offered by various, various people who provide online education is what will then become the differentiator, right? Like today we talk about the II colleges and we say we will hire from here or we will hire from there, etc. That's because they have created a very credible place for themselves. I think that is the evolution that will happen over the couple of years that we will see, where online educators will set out a space for themselves. We will know as hirers, as recruiters, that, hey, this course done from this place is actually quite valued, right? We do it for Microsoft online accreditation. We know not everyone can just get it, right? So when we see something like that, we know that, hey, we have to accord that value to it. I think that is the journey that will now come about, especially now that, with the COVID times and everybody is on this platform. That is what I think will become a differentiator.
And if
I
I may,
agree.
if I may
agree
just
with.
add a little point on that
Okay,
one.
Vivash,
Vivash.
Vivek, after Vivek, I'll come to Vivash.
Okay, sure.
Which is true. See, at the end of the day, quality does matter. And look at it this way, like 5 years out. I mean, there is obviously in the US, given the pandemic, Google has just launched their Google certification program where they're very specific. For $49, you're going to get trained on skills that are in demand today. Versus compare that to say $120,000 3-year graduate program where there is an opportunity cost of the person being completely. I mean, I'm not taking away the basics that you just need to understand philosophy and stuff like that at an early, at the primary school, K1, K5, K12 level. But beyond that, and that is where everybody falls off the cliff, because to my earlier point, you can't do it just for a narrow band of people in this country. It has to go much, much bigger. Right. Imagine a scenario where Microsoft certification programs are available. There is a Google career certificate available. In 4 to 5 years, upGrad offers something. In 4 to 5 years, and some of this is in conjunction with corporates like us, where we discuss and figure out what do we need, because we also have our 3 to 5 year business plans, what kind of skills or what kind of people that we would require. In 5 years, it becomes like a tradable skill set accreditation, where you would say, okay, I'm going to put like a point system and say that if you have done these certifications and they are as recent as 18 months vintage and you have worked or interned at these places, I'm willing to overlook your university grades. I'm willing to overlook that you're not a III guy. So I think that's the clever opportunity, which obviously how this will play out depends a lot on the willingness of all the ecosystem players and also the funding that they would get to be able to get some of these experiments out there.
Absolutely right. Vivash,
Yeah,
you had a point, and we'll close the
similar,
panel after you finish.
Yeah, similar to what Sonia said, I think corporates are looking for quality talent. So whoever is able to kind of offer that quality education, whether it's an online service provider, education service provider, or an offline, I think corporates will tend to kind of gravitate towards those education providers. So, tomorrow, if I have a choice between getting a BCom graduate from a university and probably, a 2-year certification course, which is good quality, and I know for a fact that the student who kind of, has that certification is better, there is no reason why I should just kind of, go to a somebody who holds a college university degree and not to an online education provider. I think as online education evolves, there will be a set of players which will differentiate themselves from the rest. And that's where I think corporates will tend to kind of gravitate.
It's like the evolution of any emerging industry, right? This also will take its own pace, will take its own time. And gradually the good players will be sifted from the rest. And thank you all very, very much for this discussion. There are lots of learnings from here. Most of all, that AI and ML is still the right thing to follow, right? For people. Yeah, go for it. And thank you all very much. I know how valuable your time is. You're all very busy people. So deeply appreciate the fact that you took time out for us today. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much, Alokesh. Thank you,
very
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
On this note, I will now call back my colleague, Suchetna Ray. Suchetna, switch on your camera, come back.
Hi.
Yeah. So together we will now take on the third and the final panel of the day.
Thank you, Alokesh. It's time for the final panel, and I'm certain it will help us end the program with a bang. A little bit of a context setting here. In a pandemic-hit world, technology, as we all know, has been a huge enabler and across sectors. But education is special when it comes to the enabling feature of technology. The formal Indian education system has a big catch-up to do with data, AI, and technology. And this is the gap, perhaps, that edtech startups are bridging.
Yes, indeed. That's absolutely right. And in fact, if there's anything that has disrupted the education ecosystem in India, it is this emergence of the strong edtech companies, founded by visionary entrepreneurs. So let's take a cue from our last panel where we heard about how online education is a $5 billion opportunity. It makes it an attractive destination for edtech startups and investors.
But perhaps a true test of the market will be determined by how much time it will take to mature and attract growth capital and how fast that can happen. We will find answers to it in this panel, and let's take a quick look at the panelists. We have with us Ronnie Screwvala, Chairman and Co-founder upGrad, Gopal Jain, Managing Partner, Gaja Capital.
And we have Amit Patel, the Managing Director of Owl Ventures, and Siddharth Nigam, National Managing Partner of Clients and Markets at Grant Thornton, Bharat.
So without much ado, let's just dive straight into the discussion. Alokesh, I'll begin with the first question. And my first question is to Gopal and Amit, whoever wants to take it first. You are the guys who put your investors' money in tech companies and they're entrepreneurs. So give us a sense of how you see the ecosystem now, because data shows a near 44% growth in risk capital infusion in the tech sector between 2016 to 2019. And also, when do you see this sector maturing to attract growth capital?
Amit, do you want to go first?
Sure, happy to kick things off. And thank you, first of all, to Economic Times and upGrad for inviting us to be a part of this panel.
It's been a pleasure.
Event. Thank you. I think, if you look at the last decade, there's been a variety of infrastructure issues that have been present, not only kind of in India, but globally speaking, when it comes to kind of really creating and scaling education technology companies. And specifically what I mean by that is if you look access to high-speed broadband internet connections, as well as access to connected devices, even in a country like the United States, less than 10% of schools in 2010 had access to high-speed broadband internet. And so if you're thinking about kind of creating and scaling an education technology company in that type of environment, it's going to be extremely challenging and extremely difficult. And now you fast forward to the world that we live in today, connected devices as well as high-speed broadband internet access is kind of exponentially increasing. And as you have that infrastructure coming into place, I think you have the ability to quickly create and scale education technology companies, which is why we're starting to see kind of growth stage capital being attracted to the sector, once again, in India as well as around the world. And so this is kind of, we believe just the beginning stages of what's going to be kind of a golden era for education technology to come forward over the next coming decades.
Okay, go to Gopal.
Yeah, sure. We've been investing in education for 15 years. And I think we used to think that education is where healthcare was 20 years ago. But clearly, COVID has acted like a lightning rod as far as investor interest.
I thought healthcare is still where it was 20 years ago, but anyway.
It's a long way to go. I think it's a couple of things. A, if you see the amount of consumer spend in education, if you contrast it to the amount of market cap that's been created by education, it pales in comparison when you compare it to other sectors in consumer like healthcare, etc. And that is the big opportunity for entrepreneurs. I think also what COVID has highlighted is that there is a substantial turf available to entrepreneurs. Things have received a real boost, a real acceleration in terms of investor interest, but more importantly, I think in terms of entrepreneurial interest.
Okay. I'll take the question to Ronnie and Siddharth both. India's education system has had this complaint very often that there's a education outcomes gap, and this is well known. But now with deep smartphone penetration, availability of cheap data, what is this real scope of the tech sector?
Yeah, so you want to go first?
No, Ronnie, go ahead. That's fine.
Yeah, no, I think outcomes is a very, very, very important word when you look at the entire, especially when you look at the digital space. And actually, to be honest, what I think can be tracked as outcomes in the digital space is going to be much more specific than even a classroom of 150. Because when you're looking at the technology that's been there today, and especially what we practice at upGrad, the tech platform allows you to have peer-to-peer learning much, much higher than anywhere else. The second part of measuring outcomes is that we can now almost get into a technology, and we do that, where a counselor calls one of our students actually and says, hey, you spent more than 3 times you looked at the same video. Is there a reason why you did that? Are you uncomfortable with that chapter? Can we help you with that? So when you're looking at that kind of feedback, that's one element of being able to get outcomes, because the first outcome is, are you graduating? Are you completing your course? And are you being able to do that? And I think online is normally looked at as a very anonymous medium. You can be a dropout by just not logging on the next day. And I think how do we take out anonymity from online education is one of the most important challenges that we faced. And I think we've combated that to get to that level. The second one is, when you're doing degrees at an undergrad or grad level, the outcome is really get your first job. But the real one, like in entrepreneurship, it's not the first funding that's a challenge. It's your second funding and your third funding that's a bigger challenge than your first one. And as a first generation entrepreneur, I know that better than anybody else, is again, when you're in a job, and then when you're 3 years into your career, you're 6 years into your career, you're 9 years into your career, that's when the stress points of you being redundant is even more challenging. So how do you measure outcomes where you're going to be able to stand your own? And I think part of the problem in many emerging markets and developed countries is the level of soft skills and the level of what I would call the confidence levels, the conviction levels in people. So today, online education is a mixture of being able to impart soft skills along with hard skills and at very mature levels of age. So that to me are some of the criteria for outcome that we kind of judge all the time.
Yeah, just to add on to what Ronnie said, I think, again, learning, education about two things, learning and employability. In our context, employability for a wider part of our population is an important element of getting educated. Now, what has technology done? I think it's done 3 or 4 things different from, what was formal offline education. One is there is access available to students. Secondly, there's access available to the learning part of it. You can literally deliver from anywhere in the world. Second, I think it is also flexibility, because if I look at the last 7 decades in India, a lot of people drop out of school or don't go to school because they actually have to work to make ends meet. I think online education provides that flexibility to literally learn anytime, anywhere. And I think the third piece is the constant evolution of being able to deliver that over a smart device or actually a phone, which again, has taken out a lot of the hardware challenges which existed. Now that coupled with the kind of analytics that Ronnie talked about can actually help almost provide a bespoke learning to an individual, and also the outcome, I would say still to a large part of the population is to get employed after that. And I think if online education can, expedite that and make that more effective, that's really the outcome that, in my view, is the best outcome for them.
I feel like chiming in here, because
go ahead.
When you're coming from the company side, I think the real impact of what we are witnessing today will be seen in 10 years. So we talk about digital native companies, digital native universities, digital native educational providers. upGrad is a great example. But what about digital native learners? So the real impact of what we're seeing right now is that we are creating a generation of digital native learners. All said and done, people like me will struggle with being digital learners to some extent or the other. But my 13-year-old and my 9-year-old, they are in a different paradigm altogether. So the real impact of what we are seeing today will be felt in 10 years.
Absolutely. My 15-year-old is also in that same league, right? So we are all on at the same level playing field. But this discussion is really on promoting entrepreneurship. So let us get to the entrepreneur. And basically, I just love this kind of panel, where you have one entrepreneur and you have 2 investors who are investing in entrepreneurs, and you have an expert who can sit from outside and say, yeah, you guys are not doing the right thing and not doing the wrong thing, that kind of thing. So my question to all of you, and just angle it differently, right? So my question to Ronnie is, now everybody wants to be Ronnie Screwvala, right? Be a mathematics, celebrity when you're in television in Doordarshan Times to what you are today. It's been an amazing journey. And are you an exception, or would you like, how can we make this more common than the exception that Ronnie is today? So I'd like to hear that from Ronnie's own perspective as to how we can get more entrepreneurs to get interested in education. And I'd like to ask the same question to Gopal, Siddharth, and Amit as to how can we create more Ronnies in our system? So
well,
first we go to Ronnie.
yeah, well, absolutely no question. Why should anyone be an exception? I think each one is to their own. I come from a lower middle class family, and I think first generation entrepreneurship is the real core. And I think in India, we don't need 1,000, 2,000, we need around 1 million of them. Because if 1 million of them can generate between 100 to 10 to 100 jobs, I think our problem is solved. Because otherwise we'll keep talking about skilling, and skilling is creating some sense of supply, and the demand on jobs is just not going to be there. So I think my moral responsibility as one of many, many entrepreneurs is to keep that going. So I think it's not that. It's about this complete DNA for first generation entrepreneurship, which I think this country is lacking. And I think part of that is because I think we sit on the fence. We have a little fear for failure. And as I keep telling everyone, first, the word is fear. 90% of the time you're fearful, and therefore you don't even want to get to the failure part. Except that once you fail, you're no longer fearful. And all we need to do is get over that mount. And I think that's one of the ones that we kind of push to do forward. I think as one looks at it today, the younger generation is looking at a mixture of impact along with business sense. And I think that's a phenomenal trend that I've seen with people. When they're having a conversation, they want to solve a problem. They want to create something with impact. And I think education, healthcare, many others come into that category. So actually, I'm quite hopeful that we will stir up over the next 10 years a lot in terms of self-entrepreneurship. Because in India, self-entrepreneurship has really been the Kirana store. It's been that one or two people who've been self-employed rather than being entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is about creating a wave. It's about creating businesses at scale. The biggest thing that we have to solve in education today is to solve a problem at scale. And I'm obsessed with that thought process. And I think that's why the digital medium and online, the biggest differentiator for me is the offline medium is a selective medium. And actually, the online medium to solve has to be a more eliminative medium. It's about a few people that we'll guide and say, maybe you're not ready to take this course. So why don't you come back a year later and we'll help you with that? Versus a university that looks at their brand, rightly so, that says, if I pick the best 5,000 people, I'll churn out the best 5,000 people. So if we can make this shift in our education system also between online and offline, I think we'll solve a lot of problems.
I'll take off from what Ronnie had to say. He made a very poignant point about the first generation entrepreneurs. Fear, he said, that's a mindset issue he spoke about. I want to take this question to Gopal and Amit. Do you think it's fear, or when you hear pitches from entrepreneurs, do you think that the true innovative spark is perhaps missing?
I don't. So yes, I think actually, if you see, Ronnie has said both things. On one hand, we're talking about first generation entrepreneurs. I think the real issue in India is not the lack of entrepreneurship. 55% of Indians are self-employed. The real issue in India is our inability to create scalable businesses.
Absolutely.
So we are a nation full of dwarf-sized businesses, right? We don't create scalable businesses. So the question, and I think this Ronnie said in the second part of his comments, is it's not just about entrepreneurship. It's about entrepreneurship in the context of scaled world-class businesses, right? And for that, it takes two to tango. But the first part is, for the first time in many years, the addressable market is looking truly exciting, right? So the addressable market has expanded. It's always been large, but it's looking even more exciting. And within that, the tags are looking very interesting, because first generation entrepreneurs, people who come from a certain educational background, people who are looking for linear paths in life are looking for those tags. And what are those tags? Technology. Second very important tag, Ronnie said, is impact. And the third very important tag is assessments, outcomes, industry interface. These are all three kind of linked together. Assessments, outcomes, industry interface. So these tags are making the addressable market look really interesting. The weak part of this, the policies, and I'll come to that later. I think we can take this to another level. If you really want to build 100 scalable businesses in education in India in a shorter period of time, then we have to ask ourselves also about the right policy initiatives. Yeah. We should go there last because we can spend the rest of the evening, afternoon talking about policy. But coming back here, I think addressable markets looking interesting and the tags are looking really interesting.
And we are hopeful that you will spend more money on, putting money into and getting us more and more entrepreneurs like Ronnie who can take
Well, I don't think Gaja capital has ever been an issue. Our interest in education has not been the issue. You need 100 Gaja capitals.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a contrarian point here before Amit goes. I think the other part about entrepreneurship is there can't be a total fetish that without funding, you can't build a business. I think funding is an essential part. It's one of multiple criterions. And I think that's also a myth we need to shatter here. I think the first business I started was a media company at 37,500. I've been fortunate to launch upGrad with a higher capital base, hopefully with a higher ROI on that context. But I think we get a little too stuck on capital raising as a prerequisite to build scalable businesses. There is a merit for that, but there's also should not be an obsession for it.
So where do we get stuck? Is it the idea, or is it that we do not know how to build a business? What is it?
No, I think we get stuck with our glass ceilings a lot. And glass ceilings are meant only to be broken. That's why they're called glass ceilings. Otherwise, they'd be concrete ceilings. But I'm taking it away from Amit, so I think I'll let him.
No. I think has a question to Amit, a specific question to Amit, yeah?
No, I will, but let him answer this question first.
Sure.
Yeah, so, the simplest way to answer your first question is if we could figure out how to clone Ronnie, that would solve kind of the issue of how do we get, 100 or 1,000 entrepreneurs.
But that is ethical
like
issues.
There you go.
We'll have
there
ethical
you go.
problems.
Yeah.
There you go. In all seriousness, I think entrepreneurship is one of the most courageous paths that anyone can take. And Ronnie mentioned this kind of need for having like kind of a cycle that we've kind of talked about before, which is, hey, in order to attract entrepreneurs to the sector, you need to have capital coming into the space that is willing to make kind of not just early stage bets, they're willing to make mid-stage bets. They're also willing to make growth stage capital investments as well. And then you need to have the proof points that exist that show the success stories that have happened in the space. And I think in India, in the education technology sector, you are starting to see that. And that's what creates the flywheel effect, which is going to have more talent, more entrepreneurs come into the space, more capital, and then kind of have that get started that way. I think the second thing that I'll make the point is, entrepreneurship is something that this generation is really going after, right? It's like, if you think about kind of the star status that entrepreneurs are getting in the world that we live in right now, it's on par with, kind of Bollywood celebrities, as well as like kind of sports figures and things like that. And so from that perspective, I think the next generation that's coming up is not saying necessarily, hey, how do I go and work for, kind of the big company and things like that? They're saying, how do I actually go and have the impact that I want to have on this world? And then coming back to kind of Gopal's point, is this next generation really wants to have an impact, right? And they're looking for ways that they can actually change this world. And education happens to be one of the best ways you can have that impact on this world. And so I think we're starting to see the quality and influx of talent into the sector, just get higher and higher every single year.
I want to take that observation to Siddharth, because what the investors themselves are seeing. Are you also seeing that as an independent observer?
Yeah, Alokesh, so I'd like to make a different point. I think, we have to look back into history on why there are fewer entrepreneurs in education compared to other sectors. I think it is to do with the halo that we had around somebody who was an educationist. Money was not good. You became an educationist for doing service to the society, and hence even, we will talk about it, that how the structural impediments in the sector are as a result of that it was a not-for-profit sector. The idea was to create educational institutions which existed for a higher purpose, as opposed to creating value for stakeholders. Now that itself had become and still continues to be a bottleneck for attracting investment into the broader sector. I think with technology or ed tech, some of those paradigms have changed, but I think I still see a challenge in getting experienced folks from the sector to become entrepreneurs, given that that's really the factory through which they passed. I think also the other issue that we have here, and Ronnie talked about, is I think people don't, businesses don't become successful due to lack of funding. I think funding is an important element. But where the challenge comes is if businesses are being created only to be, sold or to create value. I think that's where that short-term view on education as a sector again becomes I would say a block, mindset block, because this is something we have to really see the impact. We have to have a 5, 10, 15-year view on the impact you'll be able to make as an entrepreneur, and hence the value that will get created over that period of time.
We have over 300 participants, audience listening into us, and there are close to 30 questions. So this is a question we had, and it's a question that's coming in from an attendee as well. I'll take it to both Gopal and Amit, whoever wants to go at it first. Which is the most exciting segment as far as EdTech in India is concerned? Is it the K-12 space? Is it the entrance exam space? Is it the professional certification upskilling space? Is the question coming in from the attendee? And I want to ask you, what about vernacular education? Is that an exciting space? Amit, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. Al Ventures, we're an education technology focused venture capital fund. And so we invest across the education spectrum. And my answer to kind of that question would be a little bit of all of the above. I think to date, we've made a few investments that have been in specifically kind of the K-12 sector. So we were investors in both Byju's as well as White Hat Junior, and kind of continue to believe that that has obviously been a very exciting category when it comes to the Indian EdTech sector. But similarly, I think as you look at kind of the higher education sector and the future of work and workforce development, companies like upGrad are also extremely exciting, and I think are doing extremely innovative things that are not just unique and applicable to the India market, but can be leveraged on a global basis. And I think that's something that particularly makes companies in India very, very exciting, is the fact that a lot of the companies that are getting started here, and I think one of the previous panels mentioned this, is it's starting companies that are not only going to serve students based in India, but could serve students around the world. And I think that's something that's really unique to companies that are based in India. And we're seeing that kind of across the spectrum.
Okay.
Gopal?
Well, I can't help but agree that it's, so let me add a nuance to it, that because there are opportunities in every part of the sector, we've invested successfully in preschools and schools and vocational. I think it's about the quality of the entrepreneur and the partner. So finally, it's also about the person behind the wheels that really matters. This entire disruption in the last 6 or 9 months is going to leave behind a changed world. I mean, just look at higher education. We used to talk about blended learning, but mainstream higher education has become blended, right? Look at K-12. I mean, K-12, and there was no concept of blended learning in K-12. K-12 has discovered blended learning, and it's here to stay, right? So schools have discovered that students have another 3 hours at home that will, and they can use that very effectively with technology. So coming back to your question, it's not about A versus B or C. The addressable market in many segments is very large. I think for us, finally, the choices are about, the partner also.
So what is the most important thing, the idea or the man behind the wheel?
I'm a people-oriented person, I mean, as an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur investor. Entrepreneurs have a different way of looking at the world. There are times when the market creates a venture, and there are times when people create ventures. But really, our business starts by backing people. I think it's a chicken and egg situation, but here I can say the people part comes first.
Yeah, actually, I think this first mover advantage thing, personally, I feel that it's a little overhyped. It's not about first mover or third mover. It's about who executes best and who has the best vision for the long term. And coming to your point, on the quality of the entrepreneur. So, it's not just about the quality of the entrepreneur, but also about how you're going to take things forward with the business model that you have. So for Ronnie, for example, if I'd like to ask you, how do you think about, overcoming concerns? Because what happens in education is that education is extremely critical for everybody, right? Right from nursery to, PhD and thereafter. And I've known people who have sold their land, to get their children into an educational institute by an entrepreneur, which turned out to be a hoax and turned out to be false, right? So that kind of situation, what happens is the merit and the quality of the brand that is offering it is of extremely high critical importance, right? People don't take very kindly to institutes that advertise too much, for example. Because like somebody mentioned in the previous panel, education has been seen more as a social thing than a business thing. So, you're making money, you're advertising, right? So that is the general feeling. But so as an entrepreneur, how would you not only yourself but advise other entrepreneurs? How can they overcome these concerns about maintaining the quality of the content, about their end means, and also how do you keep your cost of student acquisition low?
Yeah, I think these are all very, very relevant points. My absolutely very singular answer would be think of it in the long term. If you're going to think of anything in the short term, then you're going to have challenges with everything that you're doing here. And specifically in education, you will create value. You will create value in the short, medium, and long term. But you have to think long term, because then you won't, then a lot of what you raised here, yes, we need to change mindsets in the not-for-profit space to the for-profit space. And frankly, I'm a firm believer that there's no such thing as for less profit. And there's a whole element of social entrepreneurship in this country or in many places, which is where people feel, I need to do something, but I won't do it for too much profit. And my sense is that doesn't work. Either it's a not-for-profit or it's for-profit, because then with that for-profit, you can solve at scale. So my first thing to a lot of people in the education sector is, if you're looking at this, be very clear if it's hardcore for-profit or not-for-profit. And don't try and say, oh, but it's a high impact sector, so maybe I'll do it for subsidized profit, because you won't attract capital, you won't scale, you won't solve problems at scale. Second, therefore, comes to really solving it at the impact level. And I think that's pretty much, if you can look at it from the long-term point of view, everything else melts, because credibility is long-term. It can't be built with an advertising campaign. That's awareness. What you really need to build in credibility is a long-term. It has to be, it's a slow process. And I don't mean you can accelerate that process, but after some stage you can't. So if you're looking for a lot of quick fixes, it's not going to happen. But can you keep a pace? Absolutely. I think technology is allowing us to get a momentum and a pace of execution, which is quite incredible. And at a capacity that is huge. When we have a class of 1,000 people in one of our cohorts, the engagement level in that class of 1,000 is much more than the class of 100. So what does that actually prove, right? Because the peer-to-peer learning element, the entire element of buzz, as you call it in education, because even when you're looking at education, there's a sense of student competitiveness. I mean, part of the reason why some of the US universities excel today is their spirit of competitiveness that they teach. How do we bring that element of competitiveness even in the learning element of what is being taught across the globe? Because actually that's a very subtle point, but a very important point, because that prepares you for the real life and the real world. And so those are elements where I would say, but in summation, I would say, be clear if it's for-profit or not for profit, and think of it as long-term.
I'll come to Siddharth. There's a very interesting question coming in from the audience. It's from Rishikesh Dave. He's talking about the importance of leadership in entrepreneurship. And he's then drawing our attention to the NEP and saying how the focus has been on skill development rather than producing entrepreneurs. Is that the real problem in India? Is that at all a problem in India?
So I don't think there is a problem in that. I alluded to education having two parts, learning and employability. I think skilling is really addressing the employability issue, which is extremely important. We have to realize that there are, I think, about 40% of our workforce earns today, eats tomorrow, right? And if people come with that economic burden, it's important that any education of any sort should get them employability. And I think skilling is addressing that. We have traditionally, the government set up the ITI network, which was exactly supposed to do that, skill people in vocational jobs so that they can, go out, get employment and, make sure that they can provide for their family. Today, I think when we look at that, there is almost intermingling of those two things, because again, I was listening to the panel before this. There is room for formal education. Formal education provides you with learning, exposure, a lot of, I would say, thoughts and ideas that it encourages you to, think. Whereas skilling allows you to, get that edge that you require to be successful. So I would say that those two things have to marry. And even, your education doesn't finish once you get a job, right? There's a whole concept of upgradation, and I think, the
lifelong learning we heard in the previous panel.
So platform that Ronnie set up, part of that is also addressing corporates like ourselves, saying that you've got this, so-called workforce which is highly educated, but how do we make them more effective? Because you don't stop at 20 or 21. You can continue to upgrade your skills in various ways and forms in the areas that you function.
Absolutely.
I
Thanks
just
for
want to
that.
add. I just want to add a little point to that,
Yeah,
because I
please.
think the question was more. This is on the basic premise that can
Yes.
entrepreneurship be taught, and that's a question that
Exactly.
all of us keep asking ourselves a lot of the time. So, an education policy is not going to focus on entrepreneurship because the basic premise is entrepreneurship cannot be taught. I'm of the school that 50%, you're right, it can't be taught, but there's a 50% that if it can be taught, we can make some really superb entrepreneurs. Because if you can teach idea validation, risk-taking, you can't teach. The element of getting gut feels to what you want to do, the impetus, the passion, those are not things you can teach. But there's so much that you can teach in entrepreneurship that can actually take it to the next level.
Of course, Ronnie. So that is the next course coming up in upGrad, right?
Let me come in here and give you an example.
Yeah.
So 30 years ago, 28 years ago when I graduated, on a typical IIT campus, 99% of people were looking for a job, right? Either in India or abroad. And after 99%, let's say 75% were looking for a job abroad. Today, on a typical IIT campus, 80 to 90% are looking to do a startup.
Correct.
Now, how has that changed? Has the
Absolutely.
curriculum changed? No, it hasn't, right? In fact, has it become easier, or has the socio-economic profile of students changed? So to go back to Ronnie's point, what creates entrepreneurs is a whole host of enabling factors. So, and just think about it, what has changed in 30 years? The market's become larger. There's so much more startup capital available. There are incubators on campus. So nobody's chasing that $40,000 a year job. Can you imagine? Yeah, that's all it took, $40,000 a year to take an IIT out of India. And
You're absolutely right.
so it's not teaching alone that creates an entrepreneur. It's a whole host of enabling factors.
See, the problem is, Gopal, while you're right, and incidentally, there is an Institute of Entrepreneurship in India, Suchetna. At some point I will find it and I'll send you a link for it.
Sure.
But yeah, where they teach people how to be entrepreneurs. I don't know how successful they are.
I belong to the category that Ronnie described earlier, the fence sitters, the fearful ones.
Yeah. But the point of India's education, one of the things that I raised in the previous panel, and probably we'll keep this as the last question, for this session. The fact is that India's education is not only about the cities, right, and the towns. And if you look at the situation after COVID struck, and specifically after the lockdown, the number that I quoted in the previous panel was that 80% of government school children, their education has stopped completely after COVID has struck, because they don't have the laptops, they don't have the phones, they don't have the network connections, even in cities, right? Not only, and you can imagine the situation in villages. Now, it's going to ask quite a lot for entrepreneurs like Ronnie, like upGrad and Byju's to get into there. But you need innovative models to address the situation in those areas, because they also need the education, right? They may not subscribe to the model that works in the city. But how can we encourage and find entrepreneurs in those areas who can be supported to provide innovative solutions that work there?
I'll give you my live examples, and this is not wearing my upGrad hat, but wearing my not-for-profit Swadesh Foundation hat on. We work with 1,200 schools and 800 Anganwadis in rural Maharashtra. We have now created about 16,000 entrepreneurs in the Swadesh Foundation, from casual entrepreneurs to multiple entrepreneurs to people who are running chilling plants for dairy, for the dairy supply people to come in there. And these are all people at an absolute rural level. The one thing we have to change in the education system is to raise aspiration levels for the other half. That's 600 million people. The biggest thing I've learned when I'm working in the not-for-profit space is one word. It's called lifting aspirations. And I think if we can do that, we can change a lot in the entrepreneur stage when it comes to the rural part. The second, I know we talk about connectivity, but people find solutions. Right now in our 1,200 schools, we've moved from Swadesh to Swadesh Digital. And we're actually imparting, we're doing libraries, we're doing storytelling with the lower classes, and we're doing maths classes, etc., all on digital. Whoever can't have connectivity huddles in a group. So 6 kids come into one household where the network is better. They figure their solutions out. Parents are being able to do that. So I think I'm very exhilarated and excited about that to-do approach, even when it comes to rural India. I don't think it's going to convert into a business right now. But if those people can raise their aspiration levels, which is our moral responsibility, we can change a lot.
100%, nearly 100% of Indians have access to a digital device, to a mobile phone. Nearly 75% of Indians have access to the internet. So if you have a 50% failure in private schools and a 90% failure in government schools, then clearly it's not the consumers that have failed. It's the providers who have failed. You see my point? That, and if you want, if the way out of this is to open this up, let a million revolutions happen. We still as a country haven't invited the private sector wholeheartedly, entrepreneurs wholeheartedly, to solve what is arguably one of the largest human problems on the planet, which is how are you going to educate India and how are you going to skill India? Educating India and skilling India are massive problems. Can we really solve these problems without partnership with the private sector? So it's not the consumers. Consumers have made up their mind. Private India has made up its mind. It doesn't have any hang-ups about for-profit, not-for-profit. More than 50% of all incremental enrollments in our K-12 system are happening in private schools. Government schools are shutting down by hundreds. Public India hasn't made up its mind, and it needs to make up its mind quickly.
If I may, just what Gopal said, I think there is a desire for the public-private partnership, at least the areas that we operate in. And again, going back to entrepreneurship, I'll go to skilling. Government's initiative to skill, providing the infrastructure has been around, but I think one of the things that they've done quite successfully is set up organizations such as NSDC, who actually fund small entrepreneurs who are involved in providing skilling, which leads to employment. So somewhere that is, in my mind, is a real public-private partnership where you're encouraging entrepreneurs, you're taking the lack of funding away, but you're also looking at the impact that's going to create. I think that public-private partnership has to play a much larger role as we try and address what I call the formal education system. And in the current pandemic, this work from anywhere, study from anywhere is really the model that has got tested. Today, there are many media, and if people don't have access to hardware, Ronnie talked about shared hardware. We have ways to reach the corners of the country, really the up country, and see where that device is. Can we look at the medium of instruction? I mean, some entrepreneur has to come up saying that, listen, today, lack of bandwidth, lack of hardware, how do we actually still operate and provide education to people? And I think that's really the opportunity. And Gopal, you talked about IIT. The aspiration was to get a job and move out, right? That, in my view, if I look back 25, 30 years ago, that was an opportunity, or that was an aspiration to get an opportunity to be an entrepreneur in the US or wherever else. That opportunity did not exist today. I think a lot of the folks who migrated are very successful entrepreneurs in different geographies. So I think we have that. We have in our DNA of being an entrepreneur. I think it was just a matter of getting the opportunity. So I'm quite optimistic and bullish about India's entrepreneurial DNA, and hope to see many more successful entrepreneurs in the decades to come. Focus on education.
I'll take the question, Amit. Yes, please.
So I'll just make kind of two points. So one is when it comes to kind of education technology solutions, I think the advantage that education technology presents is you can really deliver that personalized learning. If you wanted to do kind of the one-on-one instruction or the one-on small group instruction, which all of the academic research has shown, like kind of that's the best form of instruction that can actually exist. And the other thing is that coming back to your point about kind of accessibility and kind of meeting the learner where they are, anyone can access this education regardless of where you live. You don't need to be within a certain mile radius of a certain instructor or a certain campus to actually get access to that education. So I think that's point number one about what makes these education technology solutions very exciting. I'd say the second thing that's making this kind of particularly exciting is, if you look at kind of the education system, it's been like siloed in the sense that, the K through 12 education system is, kind of viewing the responsibility as just, hey, we need to graduate them from K through 12. And then it's up to colleges to say, hey, all our responsibilities kind of graduate them from universities. And then the employer is saying, hey, what about the skills that we need to kind of have them be employable within the university and things like that. And so what you're having is now companies such as upGrad kind of come into the ecosystem and where they're saying, hey, we're actually taking the full responsibility of not just graduating from our program, but we're also saying that it matters what type of job you get, kind of what is the salary increase that you're going to get, and what is the impact that we have on your kind of lifelong career trajectory. And I think breaking down these silos, breaking down these barriers is kind of the potential that we need to invest in to make these education technology companies be long lasting and take that real long-term approach that, Siddharth and others were mentioning on this panel.
It was an absolute delight having all of you. We've completely run out of time. The entire summit was very engaging, and what a way to end the day with this session. It was great hearing all of your views. We spoke about entrepreneurship, its social impact on India, and how, as Gopal pointed out, that perhaps we are on the cusp of 1 million entrepreneurs blossoming across the country. Ronnie spoke from experience to show that all these ideas will perhaps take the experience of being an entrepreneur to even the farthest corner of the country. Siddharth, Amit, thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much, Gopal and Ronnie, for taking the time out and for this enriching experience for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronnie.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Ronnie, just stay on for a minute. And
yes.
Thank you, panelists. It was really wonderful doing this event with upGrad. Ronnie, if I may now request you to kindly deliver the vote of thanks for today.
Yes. Well, look, I mean, when I started off this session, I had good expectations, and I think we've actually surpassed those expectations. And I think, firstly, I want to thank the Economic Times and the absolute depth with which you have done the homework, probed the questions. Like anything else there, I mean, the key part for any real active discussion, I've always found, is the quality of the questions. The quality of the answers follow afterwards. So firstly, thanks to both of you and to the entire panel there for asking those very succinct questions. And I think the good part today was everyone spoke openly. And everyone spoke openly because almost every participant in all the 3 sessions I found spoke because they felt it was like, normally you talk about a sector in a third-person way. And I think everyone is speaking about education in a first-person way. And that was my major takeaway from today's session. So I think that was very gratifying. I'm sure for a lot of people who are listening to this will listen to it afterwards, and some of them will read about it in the print later on. They'll each draw their own sort of treasure troves from it. But these were my 2 takeaways. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for everyone coming together on this. And I really, on behalf of the Economic Times and upGrad, want to thank everyone for their participation and for everyone for listening and then in future reading.
Thank you very much, Ronnie, for those words. It's really wonderful partnering with you, and we look forward to interacting with you more in future. Thanks to all the people who joined us for the event today, spent your valuable time and spend the time with us to listen to some great insights. Thanks to my co-panelists and to my co-moderator, Suchetna Ray, for the first session was absolutely delightful, and the second and the third sessions were also very, very interesting. And
it's been an absolute delight and a great way to spend the first half of Tuesday. Yes.
Yes. So thank you all very, very much. And we will end the session here today. Goodbye.